Hi guys, tonight we ease into a long, slow walk across the frontier, and you step onto the open plains just as the last wash of sunset slips beneath the ragged horizon. The grass shivers, the sky turns the colour of cooled iron, and as you breathe in you immediately feel the honesty of this place pressing against your skin. It is sharp, unfiltered, and so cold that your lungs seem to protest with every inhale. You stand alone out here wrapped in a coat that is already failing at its one job, and you can tell the temperature is dropping much faster than you hoped. There is always that tiny moment right at the start of a frontier night when you realise just how thin you are compared to the enormous dark settling around you. And in the back of your mind, a tiny voice whispers that you probably will not survive this kind of cold if you try to tough it out the way Hollywood cowboys do. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you feel like sharing, let me know your location and what time it is where you are. Now dim the lights, and you take your first careful step forward into the story. The night moves in with no politeness at all. It spills across the prairie like ink soaking through cloth thick and certain, and you sense how cowboys in the 1800s learned quickly that once the sun dipped, they were dealing with a new world entirely. Temperatures on the Great Plains could swing dramatically, sometimes collapsing 40 degrees between late afternoon and midnight. That is a mainstream fact any historian will nod at. But as you walk adjusting your scarf, you also remember the odd little detail a veteran trail hand once passed along. Some riders swore they could predict the coldest nights by the way their horses flicked their ears during sunset. Maybe superstition, maybe frontier barometer. Historians still argue whether such micro-behaviours meant anything, or if cowboys were simply searching for patterns in a landscape where unpredictability ruled everything. The ground beneath you emits that crisp crunch that comes when dry soil freezes at the top but still hides warmth deeper in. Each step sends small vibrations up your legs. You feel the cold through your boots, slow but steady, like the frontier trying to crawl under your clothes. The wind nudges at your coat collar. Not strong yet, but you know the wind out here is never a guest. It is a resident, a long-term tenant that enjoys rearranging your plans, your hair, and occasionally your entire campsite. You hear the settling groans of your horse behind you. Animals always sense the cold coming faster than humans. You look back and see it lowering its head in that resigned cowboy horse way, accepting the long hours ahead. The scent of dust, dry grass, and leather mixes in the air. Even the saddle creaks more sharply in the cold, as if the leather fibres stiffen with every passing minute. You keep walking because cowboys are always walking at dusk, checking positions, scanning for trouble, or just trying to shake off the exhaustion of the day. The sky above you is unexpectedly clear. Frontier nights could be breathtaking in winter stars, popping out one by one as if trying to distract you from the fact that your fingers are losing sensation. You lift a hand and exhale against it, watching white breath puff across your skin. The warmth disappears instantly. Somewhere to your right, a solitary coyote yips. Not close enough to worry you, but enough to remind you that you are not alone out here. Sound carries strangely on frozen air. It stretches miles, bending around invisible pockets of warm and cool currents. Cowboys often claim they could hear a man speaking from half a mile away on the coldest nights. A boast, maybe. Or a quirk of the atmosphere doing strange things at sub-zero temperatures. You notice your shoulders tightening. Not from fear, exactly. More from the subtle instinct that you are entering the hours where mistakes could be permanent. The night demands preparation. That was the cowboy rule. You do not wait until you are freezing to find a solution. You act while your hands still move and your brain still works before fatigue and cold team up to fog your judgment. And yes, historians point out that many of the worst cold-related tragedies happened not because cowboys lacked gear, but because they underestimated early night winds. A gust brushes past, trailing icy fingers across your cheeks. You pull your bandana higher, tucking it under your chin. You feel the fabric stiffen a little already. Cotton behaves differently when cold, more brittle, more scratchy. The smell of camp begins to drift in from her head, a faint smoke scent mixed with hot metal and faintly burnt coffee. It guides you the way a porch-light guides a traveller. You pass a patch of prairie that glitters softly under the young moon, frost forming. Not snow, not ice, just the first delicate warning layer that the night intends to be relentless. You drag your boot across it and hear the fragile crystals crackle. Cowboys often describe this sound as one of the loneliest noises on the trail. You're never more aware of the empty miles around you than when you hear frost breaking under your own feet. A mule deer bounds away at the edge of your sight, startled by your movement. Its hooves click sharply against the hardening earth. Strange how even in freezing temperatures the plains remain full of life. Not comfortable life, but life that has simply learned the rules better than you have so far. You inhale again. The air feels thinner, sharper, as if it is trying to crystallize inside your nostrils. By the time you reach the cluster of bedrolls and low-burning fire, the cold has settled into your clothing like an unwanted tenant. You stand on the edge of camp, letting the tiny hints of heat graze your face. Cowboys treated fire not just as warmth, but as a kind of fragile companion. It required feeding, tending, and patience. And as you watch the thin flames struggle against the wind, you understand why. Every spark is a gift. Every coal is a negotiation with nature. Two riders shift in their blankets, nodding at you without lifting their heads. Talking wastes heat. Breath is valuable. You ease yourself down near the fire, feeling the cold release its grip on your knees. The smell of burnt pine drifts upward. Somewhere a tin cup rattles. Leather pops as it cools. You glance upward again, letting the stars settle you. They look impossibly steady, as if they are carved into the sky. You wonder how many cowboys stared at these same constellations, shivering exhausted, but somehow still grateful not to be riding night guard. A small shiver runs through you again. Your body's already bracing for the long hours ahead. As the fire cracks and the cold waits at the edge of camp like a patient predator, you become aware that this is only the beginning. The frontier night is settling in fully, now opening its arms and inviting you to learn every uncomfortable, beautiful, and strangely peaceful lesson it has to offer. You sit very still for a moment, letting the thin ribbon of warmth from the fire travel slowly across your hands, and the first true chill of frontier night sinks into your bones with a confidence that feels almost personal. The cold here is not dramatic or theatrical. It does not roar or flash. It simply settles in quietly the way a wolf settles onto a rock before deciding what to do with you. You feel it creeping up your sleeves, down your collar, nibbling at the edges of your ears, testing you. Cowboys in the 1800s feared this kind of cold more than stampedes or shootouts. A stampede might last a few terrifying minutes. The cold lasted the entire night, unbroken, patient, and unwilling to negotiate. You rise from your crouch and take a slow walk along the dim edge of camp. The night deepens behind you. Every step you take, the temperature feels a fraction lower, as if the darkness squeezes warmth out of the air. The cold that cuts bone, the kind that cowboys described in letters home with language that did not survive. Polite editing is now settling across the plains. You tug your coat tighter. The canvas fabric stiffens instantly in the low temperature. You hear it creak faintly. Even your breath becomes a kind of ghost that follows you for a foot or two before vanishing. There is a fact historians love to repeat about frontier winters. In some regions of the northern plains, temperatures could plunge past minus 40 degrees Fahrenheit, cold enough to freeze exposed skin in minutes. That part is standard textbook material. But you recall something more unusual, a quirky bit from an old trail diary. One rider wrote that he knew the cold would be deadly when the tobacco in his pouch crumbled to dust instead of a sticky chew. Was it science or cowboy poetry? Scholars still debate why these tiny sensory details mattered so much, or whether they were simply psychological anchors in an environment where few things made sense. You walk slowly, listening. The night around you becomes astonishingly quiet. Even the horses seem to understand the need for stillness. Their breath streams out in thick clouds. The occasional hoof scrape sounds 3 times louder in freezing air. You feel your ears tightening, that painful stiffness that comes before numbness. You rub them with your gloved fingers, generating just enough friction to ward off trouble. Cowboys did the same not because they expected miracles, but because movement kept blood circulating. In the frontier, cold circulation was survival. A faint breeze brushes against you, and it feels sharper than a blade. Wind at these temperatures has no pity. It slices through clothing, steals moisture from your skin, and reaches for your joints with icy fingers. You turn your body slightly instinctively, angling your shoulder toward the wind. Cowboys did this without thinking, always rotating like slow-moving sunflowers, except they followed warmth rather than light. You step past a thicket of sagebrush and feel the surprising softness of the soil beneath your boots. Not warm, but less frozen than you expected. That small shift underfoot reminds you that the ground here is in constant negotiation with the air above it. The deeper earth still holds the heat from the day, but the surface layer is surrendering fast. Cowboys paid close attention to these temperature gradients. A patch of more pliant soil could signal a spot where bedding should be placed. It is a subtle indicator, but cowboys trusted subtlety more than bravado. Your breath slows as you observe the landscape. The moon has brightened. It washes the plains with a cold white glow so clear it almost looks artificial. Shadows stretch in long, crisp lines. Even your own shadow seems sharper. The air tastes metallic and dry. You inhale again and feel a faint sting in your nostrils. That sting, that crystalline pinch, is something cowboys knew well. It meant the temperature had fallen far enough that the moisture inside your nose could freeze. Not painful exactly. More like a reminder that you are not built for this environment the way the land is. You return toward the fire, moving your fingers to keep sensation alive. A rider wrapped in a blanket glances up at you, his face barely visible. He says nothing. You nod back. The cold discourages unnecessary noise. Even conversation feels like it requires too much heat. Instead, the camp has settled into that hushed rhythm found only on winter nights. The crackle of the fire, the shifting of hooves, the soft rustle of blankets all blending into a kind of frozen lullaby. You lower yourself near the heat again, but now you feel the contrast more sharply. The warmth on your face and the cold at your back clash like two opposing armies. Cowboys lived in this razor-thin line between comfort and danger. Too close to the fire meant spark smoke and the risk of burning clothing or drying it out until it cracked. Too far from the fire meant shivering until your teeth rattled or your fingers refused to move. A gust of wind arrives like a reprimand. It scatters ash upward and makes the horses shift anxiously. You pull your coat tighter. The leather straps on the sleeves feel rigid. Cold stiffens everything, not just flesh. Cowboys knew that their gear became less reliable as the temperature dropped. Saddles hardened, ropes froze stiff, even revolvers could become sluggish if oil thickened. One old cowboy tale tells of a man whose spur snapped clean off when he tapped it against a rock on a frigid morning. Historians still puzzle over whether that story is exaggerated or if metal really behaved that strangely under extreme cold. You stretch your legs toward the fire, careful not to scorch your boots. The warmth bleeds into your shins, slow and syrupy. You close your eyes for a moment and let your body settle. But relaxation never lasts long in frontier cold. Your muscles remain tense. Your instincts stay alert. You know that if you let yourself get too comfortable, the returning shock of cold when you step away will be twice as hard to bear. The sky grows even darker, though the stars remain brilliantly sharp. You can almost feel their light resting on your skin like frost. The cold makes you imagine things moving at the edges of your vision. A trick of moonlight, perhaps. Cowboys often reported seeing shapes at night that turned out to be nothing more than shadows on snow. Others saw real danger, of course, but the cold played tricks on the mind. That is another point scholars still argue over whether the isolation and freezing temperatures caused frontier hallucinations, or if cowboys were simply more observant than we give them credit for. You reach into your pocket and pull out a small piece of cloth. It is stiff already, even though you tucked it away before the cold fully arrived. You rub it between your hands until it softens just a little. The fabric smells faintly of smoke and sweat, the standard perfume of trail life. You tuck it back inside your coat. Everything you carry has a purpose out here. Cowboys did not have luxury. They had utility, and the cold stripped even that down to its essentials. You rise again and pace slowly, letting your body generate heat. The prairie whispers under the moon. The grasses shiver. You feel the cold settling deeper, like a weight pressing against your limbs. You know that this is only the beginning. The night will test you hour by hour, degree by degree. And as you continue, you begin to understand why cowboys measured survival not by strength or skill, but by sheer stubborn endurance. You crouch again near the fading glow of the campfire, rubbing your palms together until faint warmth gathers in the hollow between them. The breeze turns a little harsher, biting at your cheeks, and you realize that if you do not get a fire going strong enough to last the night, your fingers might simply decide they are done participating. Fire making when fingers freeze, that is the challenge every cowboy had to face often, with tools that were barely cooperative even in good weather. Tonight you feel that pressure settling over you like a heavy blanket dipped in ice water. You pick up the flint. It feels colder than the air itself, as if it has been storing winter inside its dark surface all day. Your gloves make your movements clumsy, but removing them is not an option. The moment skin meets open air, the cold will bite hard, and you know it. Cowboys in the 1800s had no fancy lighters or compact survival kits. They had flint steel, and occasionally stubborn matches sealed with wax. A mainstream fact many accounts confirm is that the average cowboy carried at least 2 ways to spark flame, because out here, redundancy was not preparedness so much as common sense. You strike the flint once. A weak spark jumps, fizzles, and disappears. You exhale slowly. Even that breath forms its own little cloud, drifting sideways like a disappointed spectre. You position the flint again. Strike. Nothing. The cold seems to rob the spark of enthusiasm, swallowing every effort before it can reach the tiny nest of dry grass you collected earlier. There is an odd frontier trick you recall one of those quirky tidbits cowboys swore by. Some riders used to warm their flint by tucking it into their armpit for a minute, claiming it made sparks more likely to catch. Practical or ridiculous, you're not sure. Historians still debate whether warming the stone did anything to improve ignition, or if it simply gave cold cowboys a moment of psychological comfort, a ritual before the real effort. Still, you slip the flint inside your coat, pressing it against your body heat. You stand there swaying slightly, listening to the fire behind you. Breathe in fragile, dying rasps. In the distance, your horse snorts and stamps its hoof, as if reminding you that it too depends on you to keep warmth in this camp. The night does not care whether you succeed or fail, but everyone else in this circle of firelight does. You pull the flint out again, fingers stiff but determined. You crouch low, forming a small windbreak with your sleeve. The cold tries to pry your hands apart. You dig your heels into the frozen dirt. You strike the flint again. This time, a stronger spark leaps forth and lands on the dry grass. You lean close, coaxing it with soft breaths. The spark glows, flickers, threatens to vanish, then suddenly it swells into a tiny bead of orange. You feed it gently, adding a shred of bark you peeled earlier. The bark crackles faintly, then curls inward as the flame takes hold. You place a slender twig across the ember, and it ignites with a surprising eagerness. It smells of sap and resin, sharp and comforting. The small flame grows steadily, pulsing in the darkness like a heartbeat. You add a few more twigs, then a branch. The fire responds each time by lifting itself a little higher. Warmth creeps toward your face. You straighten your back, your shoulders loosening in relief. Cowboys learned early that fire was not just heat. It was life, morale, protection, and psychological armor. You cannot fight the cold without a flame. It is the only ally that speaks your language, crackling encouragement, while everything else tries to steal your warmth. The fire reaches the stage where it can sustain itself. You settle beside it, hands extended. Heat wraps around your knuckles, sinking into the joints. You flex your fingers, feeling life return. The tension in your jaw softens. You listen to the wood pop as moisture inside it expands. That small sound is strangely soothing. Cowboys described it as the closest thing to music some nights. You look down at your flint again. The surface carries a faint smudge from your glove. You think of how many cowboys leaned on this simple tool night after night, trusting it more than their luck. A few old accounts mention riders who carried chunks of flint carved into shapes that supposedly brought good fortune. One man kept his flint in the shape of a fish, another had one etched with initials that were not his own. Scholars still argue whether these personal embellishments served as talismans or if cowboys simply needed a creative outlet when boredom settled over long trails. The fire grows a little more confident now. Flames sway in a loose dance, licking around the larger sticks you have added. The air around you shifts, creating a warm bubble that holds back the harshness edging in from beyond. You take a deep breath. The scent of smoke mixes with the lingering trace of dust on your coat. A few sparks drift upward, glowing briefly before vanishing against the deep star-filled sky. You feed the fire one thicker log, positioning it carefully so the airflow gets just enough space. Good fire-making is not brute force. It is balance, patience, and attention. Cowboys understood that. They watched the way flames leaned, the way smoke curled, the way heat built or disappeared. Every decision mattered. A poorly placed log could smother the fire. Too little fuel meant waking up shivering. Too much meant burning through precious wood too quickly. Your fingers flex again. They feel stronger now, less stiff. You shift your feet closer, letting heat seep through the soles of your boots. Your knees hum with relief. For a moment you simply sit still and bask in the glow. In the dark beyond camp, the plains hum quietly. It feels like every blade of grass has frozen into attention, listening. The firelight flickers across nearby bedrolls. Fabric gleams faintly. Shadows stretch and shrink with each shift of the flame. A rider murmurs something in his sleep. Another coughs a hollow sound that echoes briefly before fading. The cold cough was common among cowboys, a result of breathing winter air for hours at a time. Yet they pressed on because rest was fleeting, and survival depended on teamwork. You move another stick into the fire, nudging it gently. Flames curl around it with a low approving hiss. You smile a little. Even if you do not say it aloud, you feel a flicker of pride. Fire achieved in this kind of cold feels like a small victory. A reassurance that you can still influence your own fate. The wind teases the fire again, but now the flames are strong enough to resist. You widen the circle of warmth by shifting a few embers. You know that soon you will need to heat water, or at least warm your hands repeatedly. But for this moment, you simply let the fire breathe for you, replacing the cold that stalked you earlier. The night continues its slow descent, bringing deeper cold with each passing minute. But now you face it with a fire that answers back. And as the crackling flame weaves light across the camp, you realize that every cowboy on this frontier depended on moments like this. Moments where their hands didn't fail them, where their tools obeyed, and where the cold was forced to retreat, even if only for a little while. You ease yourself down beside the fire, letting the warmth settle into your legs, and then unroll your bedding with the kind of care you would normally reserve for something fragile. Out here, a bedroll is not comfort, not luxury, not even a real bed. It is survival stitched together. Bedrolls built for endurance were the cowboy's closest companion once the temperature sank deep enough to stiffen rope and crack leather. Tonight, as you tug yours open, you understand immediately why riders guarded these things almost as fiercely as their horses. The fabric unfurls stiffly at first, the canvas outer shell cold to the touch. Canvas was the cowboy's shield against wind and ground moisture, and period inventories show that most riders carried one heavy roll, tied behind the saddle, often waxed or oiled to repel nighttime damp. That detail, well supported by surviving gear collections in museums, tells you just how seriously they took moisture control. Wet cold kills faster than dry cold, and cowboys knew it long before thermodynamics had fancy textbooks. You kneel and spread the roll wider, revealing the inner layers. This is where practicality meets desperation. Wool blankets, patched quilts, sometimes animal hides if a rider was lucky. Each layer smells faintly of sweat smoke and the accumulated history of countless nights like this one. You notice how the wool still holds a tiny trace of warmth from earlier in the day. Wool has this stubborn personality. Even when damp, it refuses to surrender all heat. Frontier men valued it so much that some even slept with their wool socks tucked under their shirts during the day just to keep them dry for nightfall. That bit of odd behaviour shows up occasionally in private letters, though you suspect many cowboys simply never admitted how inventive or strange their routines became. You lift the blankets and shake them lightly. Frost breaks away in fragile specks drifting like tiny glass shards. You watch them catch the firelight as they fall. Each spark of ice reminds you how quickly heat escapes from thin fabric. Cowboys learn to shake out condensation before lying down, because if they did not, the combined weight of frost and dampness would turn their blankets into stiff boards by midnight. Modern readers sometimes underestimate how thin the line was between a usable bedroll and a disastrous one, but the men living out here never underestimated anything. You kneel and run your hand across the ground where your bed will sit. You feel for uneven bumps, for sharp rocks hiding beneath the frosted grass, for patches of earth that feel colder than others. One of the reliable details preserved in old trail guides is that cowboys often scraped a shallow depression for their hips. It saved the spine during long nights and reduced shifting that allowed cold air to slip under the blankets. You scoop a little soil with your boot heel, shaping a subtle dip. The ground is cold but pliant enough to work with. Then comes the layering. You spread the canvas shell first, letting its coarse texture shield you from icy earth. On top of it, you arrange the blankets with careful precision overlapping edges so there are no gaps for wind to creep through. You feel like you are building a nest more than a bed. The frontier had a way of reducing everything to instinct. Warmth was instinct. Layers were instinct. Even the way you fold the corners feels like your hands remember something from a different life. As you work, the fire pops behind you. A spark dances upward. In the dark distance, a horse exhales in a long, low sigh. You rub your thumb along the edge of one wool blanket and feel its rough, almost scratchy texture. Wool always wakes the skin, no matter how tired you are. Cowboys use that sensation to stay alert when exhaustion threatened to swallow them. On a few late winter drives, some riders even slept with one boot inside their roll, hoping the hard leather pressing against their shin would keep them from sleeping too deeply. A strange tactic mentioned in a few dusty archival notes, and no one is quite sure whether it was ingenuity or nonsense born of fatigue. You sit back and examine your setup. It looks inviting only in the sense that it is not the frozen ground. The blankets will trap heat, but only if you enter them with some warmth already in your body. Cold bodies do not magically warm bedding. Bedding warms you only if you contribute first. That is why cowboys usually drank something hot or kept moving before lying down. You feel the temptation to crawl straight in, but you know better. Your muscles need a little more heat first. The wind shifts. It whispers across camp with a colder breath than before. The fire gutters slightly. You turn your bedroll's opening toward the flames. Cowboys learn to orient themselves so the warm side of the fire faced their chest or back, but not so close that their blankets risked sparks. This delicate balance kept them alive through nights where temperatures dipped past what any sane person would willingly endure. As you kneel again, smoothing a wrinkle in the canvas, you think of how many men rolled out bedding exactly like this night after night, trail after trail. Thousands! Many nameless, many forgotten, but their routines survive in fragments of journals, half-told stories and gear collections passed down through families. Not everything is clear, of course. Researchers continue to puzzle over certain bedroll designs that appear in museum archives, some with unusual stitching patterns, some with extra layers sewn in unexpectedly. Were they personal experiments, regional traditions, or late additions added by later owners? The evidence is too thin to draw a firm conclusion. You sit beside your bedroll and test its warmth with the back of your hand. Nothing yet. Still cold as river stone. But you know that once you're inside, wrapped like a cocoon, your own breath will slowly warm the pocket of air around you. Cowboys relied on that tiny bubble of heat more than anything. Some men tied their rolls tightly to trap heat. Others left small openings they could adjust quickly. Techniques varied, shaped by region preference and maybe superstition. You lift the edge of one blanket to your face. It smells smoky, earthy, slightly sour, a scent of effort and endurance. You think of how cowboys rarely wash their bedrolls. The materials were too fragile and too essential. A wet bedroll was a death sentence until fully dried, and drying took days. Instead, riders simply shook them out, brushed off dirt, and accepted that trail gear aged like old friends rather than fresh laundry. You run your fingers across a seam near the edge. The stitching is crude but strong. This was not factory work, but hand labour likely done by someone who valued durability over aesthetics. Cowboys sometimes repaired their own bedding using whatever thread or gut they could find. A few surviving rolls even show mismatched stitches where someone fixed tears at campfire light. Those small irregularities make you feel a certain kinship with them, as if the past is reaching forward through needle marks. You lift the outer canvas again, letting it flap softly in the firelight. Canvas holds heat surprisingly well when folded multiple times. Some cowboys doubled the canvas over their feet because toes went numb first. You tuck the foot end snugly, imagining yourself sliding inside later like a letter into an envelope. A gust of wind pushes against the bedroll. You place a saddle near the open side to act as a windbreak. Cowboys did this constantly, using saddles, bedroll bags, or even their own bodies to shield heat. The saddle also serves as a pillow, though calling it a pillow feels generous. The leather is hard cold and shaped nothing like human comfort. Yet somehow, with enough exhaustion, you know you will sleep against it as though it were stuffed with feathers. You pause and look across the camp. Other riders are settling down, adjusting their blankets, checking their gear. The fire crackles a little louder, and the cold shifts into a deeper register. You know that soon you will crawl into this rolled-up fortress, trusting it to hold in enough warmth until dawn. You kneel one more time, run your hand over the final layer, and feel a soft promise of insulation. Not much, but enough. Enough for now. Enough for a night on the frontier. You rise from your finished bedroll and look out over the dim, wavering line where the prairie dissolves into shadow. The fire gives off a soft circle of light, but outside that fragile boundary, the world feels wider and colder than it did an hour ago. Choosing the least miserable campsite is more than convenience out here. It is the quiet calculation that keeps you alive. Cowboys did not wander until they felt tired. They stopped only when the land offered a spot that could help instead of harm. You take a few slow steps outward, letting your boots test the ground. The soil has already hardened the faint layer of frost crisp under your soles. One well-supported fact in trail journals is that riders often preferred a gentle rise or small knoll if they could find one. Elevation kept cold air from pooling around their bodies the way water settles in a basin. Tonight, though, you have no hill. The plains stretch flat in every direction, indifferent to your search, so you move with patience, scanning for anything that breaks the monotony. A cluster of low shrubs catches your attention. They do not look like much, dry, stiff, almost brittle, but they form a small barrier, and you feel a subtle difference in the air as you stand beside them. A break in the wind flow. Cowboys relied on these tiny windshields. They knew that even a few feet of cover could mean the difference between shivering all night and sleeping tolerably. In some old letters, riders mentioned settling beside abandoned badger mounds or thorny bushes, simply because they blocked enough wind to justify stopping. No romance in that choice, just practicality. You bend down and touch the cold earth near the shrubs. The surface is firm, but it lacks the damp softness that signals hidden moisture. Damp ground steals heat faster than an open breeze. Cowboys learn to check for it by kneeling or pressing a hand flat against the soil. You press your gloved palm down. Cold, yes, but dry enough. A workable surface. As you stand again, a faint scent of sagebrush drifts into your nose. The plants release their aroma when the temperature drops sharply, a natural reaction. Some riders believe that the stronger the sage smell at night, the colder the coming hours would be. A curious superstition, one that shows up in a few memoirs but never got standardized into cowboy wisdom. Modern researchers are not sure whether there is any truth to it, or if it was simply the kind of trail lore men passed around when reality felt too wide and unpredictable. You take a few steps farther from camp, scouting the way cowboys did every evening. Your eyes adjust to the moonlight, helping you distinguish subtle contours in the landscape. You notice a small dip alongside a dry creek bed. The creek is nothing more than a shallow groove, now its water long gone frozen underground or evaporated. But dips like this can be dangerous. Cold air sinks. If you sleep here, temperatures can drop several degrees lower than the surrounding ground. Cowboys warn newcomers about this effect constantly, and many first-time drovers learned the hard way when they woke up colder than everyone else. You shake your head and step back, not that spot. The wind changes direction again, brushing your cheek with colder fingertips. You turn your shoulder toward it instinctively. This cowboys learned early, never take wind direction lightly. If you place your bedroll wrong, the breeze creeps into every fold, stealing heat hour after hour. You walk until you find a spot where the shrubs shield you on one side while your saddle and bedroll will protect the other. You crouch. The place feels right. Solid ground, some natural shelter, and enough distance from the fire to avoid rolling embers but close enough to catch waves of warmth when the flames flare. Cowboys paid careful attention to this spacing. Too near you risked burns and smoke damage to your gear. Too far and the cold took hold before you could even settle. You glance at the horizon again. The moon hangs low, pale and watchful. The stars shimmer sharply overhead, reflecting off frost-coated grass. Even the silence feels colder. You rub your hands together to keep sensation alive. The fire crackles behind you, offering a soft reminder that you are not alone. A shadow shifts between two horses at the edge of camp. One of them snorts, stamping the ground. You hear the leather reins pop lightly. The sound is tiny, but it carries across the still air. Cowboys often position their animals so the herd itself created a kind of half circle around the camp. Horses have a way of detecting movement long before humans do. Their agitation can warn of predators or sudden weather shifts. A practical living alarm system, though not without flaws. As you check the area one more time, you catch a glimpse of something odd along the ground. A set of shallow tracks heading in a crooked line. Probably a rabbit or small fox. Nothing threatening. But you take a moment to study them. Frontier men developed an instinct for reading tracks almost without thinking. Not because they were hunters, but because sleeping near active burrows could be disastrous. Frozen animals become desperate animals, and desperate animals can chew through leather blankets or food supplies. There's even a handful of strange accounts from the late 1800s describing nighttime encounters with rodents that tried to share warmth by crawling into bedrolls. Whether those reports were exaggerated campfire humour or grounded in truth is still uncertain among people who study frontier folklore. You straighten, turning back toward the faint glow of camp. You picture how your bedroll will sit angled so that the wind passes over it, instead of directly into its opening. You imagine stacking your saddle on the side that looks most exposed. You think through where your boots will rest so they do not freeze solid. Cowboys planned out these little steps almost automatically, not because they were obsessive, but because the cold punished every careless detail. You walk back toward the fire, glancing over your shoulder one last time. The chosen campsite looks plain, nothing special to the eye. But the land carries its own subtle intelligence, and you feel quietly proud that you listened to it. This spot will not make you warm. The frontier never gives warmth freely, but it will keep you from losing more heat than you can afford. As you settle beside your bedroll again, the wind shifts once more. You feel the cold slide across the plains, searching like an unseen animal. Yet now you have shelter, imperfect but intentional. You lie your hand on the rolled canvas and let your breath steady. The night will test you, yes, but you have carved out a tiny patch of safety against its reach. You lower yourself beside the fire again, letting your body rest before you try the next frontier trick. Borrowing warmth from the earth sounds almost poetic, but on nights like this it becomes starkly practical. Cowboys learned quickly that the ground could be both enemy and ally. If you lay straight on frozen soil, it pulled heat from you with a hunger that felt personal. But if you understood where the land stored warmth, you could coax a little comfort out of it. Just enough to survive until dawn. You stand and walk a slow circle around the campsite, letting your boots press into different patches of earth. Some sections feel rigid and cold as hammered iron. Others carry a faint pliancy, a whisper of the day's stored heat still lingering underneath. Contemporary weather notes from late 19th century trail guides make it clear that the top inch of earth cools dramatically at night, but layers beneath can hold warmth far longer. Cowboys used this simple fact long before science assigned it numbers. You kneel and press your gloved hand against one particularly promising patch. The soil gives slightly beneath the pressure, not warm exactly, but less biting than the surrounding ground. You scrape away a shallow layer of surface frost with your boot heel, revealing the darker, denser earth beneath. Cowboys often dug these shallow scrapes barely a few inches deep to reach ground that was better insulated. It was not comfortable, but it slowed heat loss from the body. The fire behind you pops loudly, sending a small arc of sparks leaping upward. You stay focused on your task. You widen the shallow depression, smoothing the bottom, so your bedroll will lie evenly. Your breath forms thick clouds that drift along the ground, merging with the winter air. You pause when the soil feels firmer and a little less icy. A faint rustling draws your attention. One of the horses shifts its weight tail, swishing in irritation. Perhaps it senses the dropping temperature, or perhaps it smells something odd in the wind. A few trail diaries mention how seasoned riders use their animals as subtle thermometers. When horses stopped pawing the ground and began huddling together, it signalled a deeper freeze coming. It is a charming observation, though whether the animals truly forecasted cold or simply reacted to it remains unclear. Different accounts disagree, and experts today still mull over how much interpretation coloured those descriptions. You turn back to your scrape. You kneel once more, resting your hand in the hollow you created. This will help, but cowboys used an additional method when the cold became relentless. They sometimes heated small sections of ground with fire before rolling out their bedding. Not big bonfires, not enough to burn the earth, but a modest flame built directly on the soil for 10 or 15 minutes. When the coals were pushed aside, the warmed patch retained gentle heat that radiated upward beneath the bedroll. You decide to try the technique. You fetch a couple of glowing embers from the campfire, using a flat piece of wood as a makeshift shovel. The heat radiating from them is almost painfully intense compared to the freezing air, and you carry them carefully to your small depression. You scatter them lightly across the bottom, feeding a few thin twigs into the glow until they catch. Soon a tiny fire flickers in the hollow, barely strong enough to warm your hands but perfect for its purpose. You sit back on your heels and watch the small flames work. They burn quickly, consuming twigs and grasses with soft crackles. Thin tendrils of smoke curl upward. The scent of warm earth rises with it, a smell both comforting and strangely nostalgic. Cowboys described that smell often as if heated soil reminded them that beneath the harsh exterior the land still held a quiet generosity. As the small fire burns down, you feel the warmth spreading across the depression. You let it smoulder until it is mostly glowing coal. Then you return to the main fire, grab a stick and rake the embers aside, exposing the heated ground. You wave your hand over the patch and feel it radiating a mild, steady warmth. It is nothing compared to a mattress or stove, but in the middle of an unforgiving winter night, it is the closest thing to luxury you will get. You pull your canvas bedroll over and spread it across the heated ground. The warmth rises slowly into the layers of wool. You press your hand onto the blanket and feel the difference immediately. Not hot, but alive. A quiet pulse of heat fading slowly but lingering long enough to help you drift towards sleep. The wind shifts, brushing cold air across your neck. You stand and move around camp again, keeping your body from stiffening. The horizon grows darker still, the last faint glimmer of twilight disappearing completely. You feel the night deepen, like the temperature is switching gears. Cowboys often remark that the coldest moments came not at midnight but during the hours just after it, when the earth surrendered, all remaining warmth and the sky pressed down like a lid. Your breath grows heavier, and you pull your coat tighter. As you move, you notice another technique cowboys sometimes used. When the earth itself offered no heat, they created insulating layers under their bedrolls using dry grass, pine boughs, or even buffalo chips. The idea was simple: trapping air equals trapping heat. In several frontier memoirs, older trail hands insisted that a few inches of dry grass under a bedroll could feel warmer than an extra blanket on top. An odd thought, yet nature often defies logic. You crouch and gather a small handful of dry prairie grass, brittle enough to snap between your fingers. You tuck it under the foot of your bedroll where heat escapes the fastest. It crackles softly beneath the canvas, forming a thin cushion. Grass like this may not change the temperature drastically, but it disrupts the direct contact between blanket and cold ground, slowing the drain of warmth just enough. As you adjust the edges of your bed, you think of the many nights when cowboys had to improvise with whatever was at hand. One strange account from a late trail diary mentions a rider who lined the bottom of his bedroll with strips of rawhide, claiming it trapped heat better than wool. The story is unusual, and those who study frontier artifacts remain uncertain whether the method was effective or simply the product of desperation on a particularly icy night. The small warmed patch beneath your bedroll continues to radiate gentle heat. You feel a quiet satisfaction settling inside you. You've taken one step toward making this night survivable. The cold will return stronger and more relentless, but for a moment you have bent the frontier to your needs. You sit beside the fire again. The flames cast shifting shadows across your bedroll, making it look almost inviting. Your muscles relax slightly as the wind calms for a moment. You tuck your hands under your arms, letting your breath settle into a slow rhythm. You can almost imagine lying down now, pulling the blankets over your shoulders, feeling the warmth seep into your back. The earth beneath you, harsh and unforgiving only hours ago, now serves as a quiet ally, a subtle one, a temporary one. But on the frontier, small victories matter more than grand triumphs. Each little choice affects how well you endure the long stretch until dawn. You look out at the dark horizon, the vast open night stretching endlessly. Then you glance down at your warmed bedroll and feel something shift inside you. Confidence, perhaps. Or maybe it's the slow acceptance that survival out here depends not on force, but on listening to the land and borrowing its warmth in whatever humble forms it offers. You lean a little closer to the fire, rubbing your hands as the warmth moves slowly into your palms, and then you lift the battered tin pot that has been sitting near the embers. The scent rising from it is unmistakable, sharp, bitter, earthy, stubborn. Cowboy coffee. Not something you drink for pleasure out here, but something you swallow, because the heat keeps your blood moving. Tonight, the cold settles heavier on your shoulders, so you know you will be relying on this brew more than once. You pour a little into your cup and watch steam curl upward in slow ribbons. The warmth against your face feels almost intimate, as if the coffee is offering friendship before the first sip even reaches your lips. Frontier accounts from the late 19th century leave no doubt that riders consumed enormous amounts of this gritty drink during winter drives. Some days the pot barely left the fire. Caffeine mattered far less than the simple act of raising your core temperature. You take a sip. It scalds your tongue before sliding down your throat with that familiar burnt flavour. You wince slightly, but you keep drinking. Your breath warms as you swallow, spreading heat outward from your chest. Cowboys did not care if their coffee tasted like boiled dirt. They cared that it chased the numbness from their fingers and toes. You swirl the cup gently. Flecks of grounds drift at the bottom. Cowboys often joked that if you could pour it without grit, it was not real coffee. And then there were the inventive methods, cracking an egg into the pot to settle the grounds, tossing in a pinch of salt to soften the bitterness, even dropping a small piece of bacon fat in when supplies ran low. One frontier memoir mentions a rider who added crushed charcoal to absorb odours, a strange technique that appears only in that one document. Whether that method served a real purpose or was simply the result of boredom and bravado remains uncertain, especially since no other source seems to mention it again. You lift your cup and feel the heat radiate through your gloves. It helps, but not enough. You shift your position, letting the fire warm your shins. The flame flickers with a steady rhythm, whispering warmth toward you in small waves. You drink another mouthful, letting the rugged bitterness roll across your tongue. The flavour anchors you to the moment, grounding you in the reality of the trail. A light breeze brushes your cheek. You feel the temperature drop again, just a fraction of a degree, but enough that your body notices. One reliable detail found in drovers' letters is that nighttime temperature drops often came in small, relentless increments, rather than dramatic plunges. Each little dip chipped away at your reserves, and the coffee helped patch those cracks, giving you a few minutes of borrowed heat. You finish your cup and pour a bit more. The liquid glows reddish-brown in the firelight. You consider how cowboys prepared the drink under far harsher conditions than this, in storms, in blizzards, in sleet that turned to ice on the brim of their hats. Many riders kept a pot suspended over the fire for hours, letting the coffee thicken into something that bordered on syrup. Several old-timers described it as strong enough to hold a spoon upright. Perhaps exaggerated, perhaps not. Those same men also swore that coffee kept them alive more times than gunpowder ever did. You take another swallow and exhale slowly as the warmth unspools through your chest. A horse shifts restlessly nearby, snorting as it catches the scent. You glance toward it. Long winter nights meant horses needed warmth too, and cowboys sometimes shared their coffee grounds with the animals to keep them alert during brutal drives. Some trail anecdotes even claim that certain horses seemed to enjoy the smell nudging riders when the pot boiled. Whether those stories reflect truth or embellishment is difficult to say, but they contribute to the strange intimacy humans and animals developed while travelling together through unforgiving terrain. Your fingers feel more limber now, no longer stiff at the knuckles. You flex them experimentally, grateful for the returning sensation. The fire pop sending a tiny spark upward. You watch it drift before winking out. You feel the cold circling just beyond the reach of the flames, waiting for its chance to seep through your layers again. You stand and hold the cup between both hands, the heat radiating into your palms. As you blow gently across the surface, you notice frost forming on the edges of your coat. The night is reaching its true character. Cold like this does not simply rest on your skin. It moves into you, tightening muscles, shortening breath, coaxing fatigue. Cowboys understood this intimately. Many winter drives were accomplished only because men sipped coffee throughout the night, taking turns warming themselves while watching over the herd. Your mind drifts briefly to a curious detail mentioned in a handful of trail cook descriptions. Some drovers insisted that if you held your tin cup over your nose and inhaled deeply right after pouring, the coffee's rising steam could prevent frostbite on the upper lip. Does that claim hold up under scientific scrutiny? Hard to say. People who study frontier practices have not been able to confirm whether the steam actually offered protection, or whether the ritual simply made men feel braver during long punishing nights. You lower your cup and take another drink. It tastes even more bitter now, but the effect on your body is undeniable. Your breathing steadies and a soft warmth circulates through your arms. Around you, the fire glows with that lived-in warmth that makes night feel more survivable. You hear the quiet clink of someone stirring the pot again, making sure the grounds do not burn. On the trail, coffee was communal. Whoever was closest to the pot tended it, adding water, tossing in fresh grounds, or scraping the sides when it boiled dry. You feel a kind of comfort knowing the same ritual has played out thousands of times across these plains. You sit down again, stretching your legs toward the fire, letting your boots take in the heat. Your cup rests in your hands, still warm. The wind quiets for a moment, softening the night into something almost gentle. You feel your shoulders unclench, the tension draining away slowly. You tilt the cup and swirl the last sip around. You drink it even though it is almost entirely grit. Cowboys did the same because waste was not an option. Coffee was precious. Beans were expensive, hard to transport, and often in short supply. Surviving supply lists show that trail bosses budgeted coffee as carefully as ammunition. Your cup now empty, you wipe the rim with your thumb and set it beside you. The fire's glow softens, shifting like warm breath across your face. Cold creeps in again, subtle but persistent. You pull your coat a little tighter, feeling the stiff fabric settle around your shoulders. The night deepens, the fire lowers. but inside you the coffee's warmth lingers a small but stubborn flame. You feel more prepared now, more alert, more capable of enduring the long hours ahead. And as you settle back, watching the horizon fade further into darkness, you understand exactly why cowboys brewed pot after pot on nights like this. Not for flavour, not for ritual, but for the simple gift of heat that kept them alive. You pull your coat tighter across your chest, feeling the stiff fabric resist, before settling into place, and you become aware of how much weight your clothing carries tonight. Coats, gloves, and wool secrets may not sound heroic, but after a few hours in winter on the open range, they become the quiet guardians of your sanity. Cowboys often said that gear mattered more than grit once the temperature dipped low enough that breath turned to crystals. You feel that truth now as you adjust your collar, pushing it higher against your neck. The coat you wear is thick canvas lined with wool, a combination that shows up again and again in surviving frontier inventories. The design was simple, rugged, and stubborn. Cotton duck cloth on the outside, wool inside reinforced seams, and heavy buttons that did not care if your fingers were numb. When you shift, the fabric creaks like old timber. The cold does that to cloth tightening fibres until they behave like carved wood. You rub your shoulder lightly, testing how it moves. Stiff but manageable. Your gloves are another story. They look sturdy enough, but you can feel cold threading through the seams, creeping into your fingertips. Many working cowboys used gloves made of buckskin, or cowhide materials that offered a strange balance of softness and strength. A number of trail documents mention that freshly oiled gloves remained flexible, even in deep cold, but once the oil wore off, they stiffened like boards. You wiggle your fingers, now trying to keep the joints from losing life. You lift your hands to your face and breathe warm air into the cupped palms. The heat fades too quickly, like water disappearing into dry sand. You lower them again, noticing how the outer surface of your gloves has already gathered a thin sparkle of frost. At night on the plains, clothing freezes as quickly as water. You brush the frost away with a rough swipe. A flicker of firelight glints off the wool blanket tucked beneath your bedroll, and you think about how wool became the unshakable favourite among riders. Not because it smelled nice or stayed clean, it certainly did not, but because wool held warmth even when damp, something the prairie's winter air took full advantage of. One detail consistently found in winter trail accounts is that cowboys often wore wool long johns for weeks at a time, washing them only when temperatures allowed. Tonight, grateful for every thread insulating your body, you understand why. You shift again, letting your coat fall open just long enough to check the layers beneath. Shirt under shirt and another hidden layer of wool. Cowboys layered the way survival dictates rather than fashion suggests. They stacked whatever fabric they had, sometimes combining mismatched pieces patched together with crude stitches. In a handful of surviving examples, researchers have found wool garments reinforced with horsehair, creating a texture that must have itched like fury, but still insulated under brutal cold. You take a seat near the fire, letting the glow soak into your clothes. The flames throw dancing shadows across your coat, highlighting how tightly woven the canvas is. Some drovers rubbed animal fat into their coats to make them more wind-resistant. A strange practice mentioned only in a few scattered memoirs, but it makes you wonder how desperate or inventive men became out here. Whether the fat created a genuine barrier or simply gave the coat a different smell remains uncertain, especially since most evidence is anecdotal and inconsistent. You run your fingers along the inside lining of your coat. The wool there feels coarse, almost prickly, but it radiates a dependable warmth. Someone long ago sheared a sheep, spun the fibres, wove them together, and created the material now keeping your ribs from freezing. You think of the long winding journey that simple fibres travelled from pasture to coat, and how countless cowboys owed their fingers, toes, and maybe their lives to wool that never tried to be comfortable, only effective. The wind shift again, brushing the back of your neck with a colder hand than before. You stiffen for a moment, then pull up your bandana until it covers the lower half of your face. Cowboys use bandanas for everything. Dust storms, smoke, sunburn, and on nights like this as makeshift face warmers. In the cold, the fabric stiffens quickly, forming a rough shell that protects your skin just enough. You roll your shoulders to ease the stiffness gathering there. As you move, the coat crackles faintly, the frozen outer layer brushing against itself. It feels almost alive, shifting with each breath you take. You place your hands under your armpits for a moment, letting the trapped heat soak into your gloves. This simple gesture saved countless fingertips on the frontier, a fact shown in multiple first-hand accounts. When gloves grew too cold to function, cowboys tucked their hands into their coats, letting their own body heat undo the damage. You rise again, pacing a short loop to keep blood moving. Your boots crunch against the hardened earth, sending vibrations up your shins. You feel heat slip out through your coat each time the wind changes direction. There is no stopping that. The goal is simply to lose heat slowly enough that your body can keep up. You pause to examine your gloves once more. The stitching near the thumb is starting to stiffen, and the leather feels less pliable. You rub them vigorously against your thigh. The friction warms them slightly, though the effect will not last long. You remember reading that some cowboys lined their gloves with scraps of newspaper or cloth when the cold became extreme. An improvised technique, no doubt uncomfortable, but layering even inside a glove helped trap warmth. You take a slow breath and feel how cold the air has become. It sinks into your lungs like chilled glass. You tug your coat in tighter response. You imagine men on long night rides guiding herds through blizzards, wrapped in layers that clung to them like armor. Clothing was not decoration here. It was a moving shelter, a portable shield against a climate intent on testing every rider who crossed its path. As you walk back toward your bedroll, you brush a hand across your sleeve. The canvas feels rigid, the cold having tightened it into something almost unforgiving. Yet beneath that harsh exterior lies the wool that still traps your body heat. It reminds you that comfort is not the priority tonight. Function is. Durability is. The coat that keeps you warm is the same coat that withstands rope burns, thorny shrubs, blowing dust, and the 1,000 tiny injuries of frontier work. You lower yourself beside the fire again, letting the warmth seep through your layers. For a moment you feel pleasantly insulated. The heat gathers at your back, your chest, your arms. You relax your shoulders and allow your head to tilt forward slightly. The clothes you wear carry a faint scent of smoke wool leather and the day's sweat, a scent worn by every cowboy who ever braved a winter night on the prairie. You rest your gloved hands on your knees. The fire crackles softly. The cold waits beyond the glow. You are wrapped in canvas wool leather and stubbornness. These layers do not promise comfort, but they promise survival. And that out here is far more valuable. The night deepens around you, settling into its slow, steady rhythm. You tug your collar up once more and let your breath steady. Wrapped in these rough, dependable layers, you feel ready to face the next stretch of winter darkness that lies ahead. You shift your coat, settling deeper into its coarse wool lining, and then you glance down at the layers beneath it. Dusty, stiff, overworked clothing that carries the entire day inside its fibres. Out here, the magic of layering dusty clothes is not a trick you learn from books or advice columns. It is something the wind and cold teach you through relentless repetition. Cowboys discovered that the very grime and sweat that made their clothing unpleasant in summer became insulation in winter. Tonight you feel that lesson in the weight of the fabric against your chest. You tug lightly at your shirt, feeling the roughness where dust has collected in seams and creases. A surprising number of frontier letters mention that riders avoided washing outer layers too often during the cold season. Removing dirt meant removing insulation because grime filled the tiny gaps in woven fabric, slowing the escape of heat. A detail like that shows how differently comfort was measured on the plains. Cleanliness might win you friends in town, but on the trail warmth meant far more. You run your hand over the sleeve of your shirt, feeling its uneven texture. Dust has stiffened the fibres, making the fabric hold its shape in a strange way. It is a familiar stiffness, the kind that keeps cold air from sneaking directly through the weave. You shift your weight, letting the light from the fire brush across your clothes. The glow highlights patches worn from friction places where rope burned briefly against your side earlier in the day. These imperfections do not weaken your layers. They remind you how hard your clothing works long after your muscles have stopped. As you crouch beside your bedroll, you inhale a faint smell rising from your clothes, sweat, leather, dust, and smoke woven together into an aroma impossible to wash away entirely. Cowboys describe this scent as part of their identity, something that clung to them during long drives. In one lesser-known diary entry, a rider claimed he could identify a fellow cowhand in a dark bunkhouse by scent alone. Whether that was exaggeration or simply the result of months spent wearing the same layers, no one can say with confidence. The accounts vary too widely to draw a clear conclusion. You adjust your shirt again, noticing how the inner layer of wool pulls softly against your skin. That wool, though itchy earlier in the day, now feels like a blessing. Wool traps pockets of air, and those pockets hold warmth like hidden treasure. Beneath that, your undershirt, stained with dust and sweat, provides yet another thin shield against the cold. Layer by layer, you have built an imperfect fortress around your body, one that depends as much on accumulated dirt as it does on thread count. You shift your gloves and slip a finger inside your cuff, touching the skin beneath. Cool, but not freezing. Layers are working. You press your hand against your side, feeling the heat trapped under the shirt. The warmth is uneven, drifting lazily like smoke collecting in surprising places. Cowboys learn to listen to those temperature pockets. If a layer clung too loosely on one side, the air would escape. If it clung too tightly, sweat could form and freeze. The balance was subtle. You feel yourself adjusting, instinctively tugging fabric here, smoothing it there. You take a slow step toward the fire, allowing the heat to seep into the top layers of your shirt. You feel the fibers soften slightly as warmth loosens their stiff, dusty form. Cowboys sometimes use this effect to reshape their clothing. A warm shirt meant easier movement. An easier movement meant longer endurance. You lift your arms a little, stretching the fabric. It bends reluctantly, but eventually yields. Nearby, one of the other riders pulls his coat close and grumbles softly about the cold. His voice is muffled by the layers wrapped around him. You glance at the way his clothes hang on him, noting a thick haze of dust across his shoulders. He has leaned into the same unspoken rule: never brush off too much dirt in winter, unless you absolutely have to. Dust is inconvenient, but warmth is priceless. A faint wind passes riffing through your outer layers without quite penetrating the inner ones. You feel the cold press against your ribs, searching for an opening. But your layers hold firm. You turn your back toward the wind, shifting the coat so it blocks the worst of it. The breeze rattles a few dried grasses nearby and then moves off into the darkness. You look down at your boots. Dust has settled deeply into the creases, forming a thin, gritty armour. When leather grows dusty, it becomes rougher but also more insulating. It keeps warm air from leaking out around your ankles, though it demands more maintenance later. A handful of surviving ranch ledgers note that cowboys needed far more boot repairs after winter months, likely because frozen dust stiffened the leather until it cracked. But for now, the effect works in your favour. You tug lightly at the hem of your shirt. It sticks to your belt, stiff with sweat and cold. The weight feels oddly reassuring. You imagine the men who rode the Chisholm Trail or crossed the Llano Estacado in winter, relying on layers just like yours. Their clothes might have been patched so many times that the original fabric barely showed, but each patch added an extra scrap of insulation. Sometimes stitched pieces overlapped so much that shirts had 3 or 4 layers in a single spot. Those garments looked strange but functioned like quilts. You settle back onto your haunches, feeling the layers shift against your body. The fire casts warm pockets of light that move across your clothes, breathing life into the dusty fabric. For a moment, your shirt almost glows. You stretch your fingers and feel the fabric brush your wrists soft despite its roughness. That contrast is part of the frontier's quiet wisdom. Something that looks uncomfortable may become your greatest ally once the temperature dips low enough. A strange memory surfaces from a story you once heard. Some cowboys stuffed their shirts with handfuls of dry grass when the cold turned vicious. They slid the grass between the underlayer and outer shirt, letting it trap warm air like crude insulation. The technique appears in a few scattered accounts, but is described inconsistently, leaving modern analysts unsure whether it was common practice or simply the desperate creativity of a few riders during brutal nights. You stand and take a few steps around the camp, letting your layers breathe. Movement creates friction, and friction creates warmth. You feel the heat growing inside your clothing, spreading from your shoulders down your torso. Your layers sway around you, heavy but effective. The fabric brushes your skin in uneven textures, part soft, part coarse, part rigid, with dried sweat. None of it is pretty, but all of it is useful. You pause near your bedroll and lift the bottom hem of your shirt, slightly shaking out a small cascade of dust. The particles scatter like pale ash in the firelight. You watch them drift away and feel a strange fondness for the grit that remains. It is part of you now, part of your protection. Cowboys lived in their clothing day and night, letting dust stitch itself into the very weave. The wind rises again, carrying a colder undertone. You pull your layers tight, letting them settle around you like armor. The chill reaches for you, but finds only fabric packed with dust, wool, sweat, and the stubborn warmth of your own body. The layers hold. You lower yourself beside the fire one last time, letting the warmth soak through your clothing. The heat moves through canvas, cotton, and wool, meeting the pockets of insulation that have formed through the day. You feel warm for a moment, truly warm, and you lean into that sensation with quiet gratitude. Your dusty layers may not be elegant, but they are loyal. They stay with you, cling to you, and keep you from freezing as the night grows colder. And as you settle in, adjusting your clothing once more, you realize the frontier did not care how you looked. It cared only that you survived. You lift your gaze toward the dark shapes shifting just beyond the glow of the fire. Horses and cattle move slowly, their breath pouring into the night like steady streams of pale smoke. The sound of them settling in hooves, scraping frost-hardened ground, is strangely comforting. Huddling with horses and cattle is not something you would imagine doing on a normal night, but here on the winter frontier, sharing warmth with the animals is as natural as pulling on your gloves. Cowboys relied on their livestock for far more than mobility and livelihood. On freezing nights, animals became unwitting furnaces that radiated heat into the frigid darkness. You step toward your horse, listening to the quiet rhythm of its breathing. The animal stands with its head lowered, leaning just slightly toward the nearest cow. A subtle gesture, but you have seen it before. Creatures instinctively cluster together in the cold. Period observations from drovers and ranch hands often describe winter nights, when horses pressed flank against flank, forming an unspoken circle that held warmth better than any blanket. The practice was not invented by cowboys. They simply noticed it and learned how to join the cluster without disrupting the herd's natural flow. You place your hand against your horse's shoulder. The hide feels warm beneath the fur, warmer than your own coat. You let that warmth settle into your palm. As you stand there breathing alongside the animal, the cold loosens its grip on your fingertips. The horse shifts slightly but does not pull away. It has learned your scent, your presence, your quiet needs. Animals in the frontier world often recognize their riders more deeply than riders realized. A few steps away, two cattle nudge each other into a tighter formation. Their bodies create a barrier against the wind drifting in from the open prairie. Cowhands from the era often described how cattle naturally arrange themselves in clusters on winter nights, each animal contributing to a shared oasis of warmth. One detail repeatedly mentioned in surviving trail reports is that the warmest spot in a herd was directly behind the shoulder of a mature cow, where heat radiated outward with surprising persistence. You walk a slow arc around the animals, feeling how the temperature rises as you draw nearer to their bodies. Their combined warmth forms a kind of invisible halo around the group. For a moment you consider stepping closer, leaning in, allowing their heat to seep into your coat more thoroughly. Many cowboys did exactly that. Some would sit against the side of a patient horse, or rest a shoulder against a cow's ribs while eating supper. Not because they wanted to smell like livestock, though that was unavoidable, but because warmth came from whatever source the frontier provided. A gentle snort breaks the quiet, and you smile in spite of yourself. You shift closer, brushing frost from your scarf as you settle near your horse's flank. The animal shifts its weight, its body heat, radiating through your coat like heated stone. You feel the change instantly. Your legs loosen, your hands soften. The cold no longer bites quite so deeply. The night stretches wider, the sky glittering with distant stars. Their icy brightness seems to mock the warmth you borrow from the animals, but you do not mind. You have what you need for the moment. As you rest, you recall a peculiar story you once heard from a ranch hand. He claimed that an old trail boss taught riders to warm their hands by resting them lightly against a cow's thick hide, specifically near the base of the tail. The idea was that cows retain more heat in that region. Whether the practice held any real advantage or was simply one man's eccentric trick is unclear. The detail appears in only a single memoir, leaving its legitimacy foggy and ripe for speculation. Your horse flicks near, catching some distant sound. You strain to hear it, but catch only the faint hiss of wind across frozen grass. The animal relaxes again, breathing deeply. You lean closer, resting your shoulder against its side. The warmth spreads down your arm, gentle and steady. You close your eyes briefly, letting the heat melt the tension in your muscles. In front of you, the cattle shift, again forming a tighter cluster. You sense the shared intelligence in their movement, not intellectual but instinctual, a survival choreography rehearsed over generations. One steers its body to block the wind, prompting others to mirror the formation. Cowboys often place their bedrolls close to the herd on freezing nights, knowing the animals would create a slow-moving shield against the prairie's ruthless chill. It was a simple choice, but one backed by countless lived experiences recorded in winter drive logs. You take a step closer to the cattle, feeling the cold diminish as you approach. You run your gloved fingers along the back of one, brushing the coarse hair. The animal barely reacts, accustomed to the presence of humans in its space. You move around the herd, staying within the pocket of warmth they generate. You understand why riders often preferred sleeping near them rather than closer to the fire. Fires offered heat only on one side, while animals radiated warmth in all directions. The wind picks up, carrying a sharper bite. You instinctively lean further into your horse, grateful for the heat still radiating from its large frame. You hear another soft exhale, warm breath rolling across your cheek like a tiny gust of summer. You savour it. Nights like this turn small comforts into precious gifts. A few cattle shuffle nervously as the breeze shifts direction. You watch them carefully. Livestock behaviour at night can reveal more about the coming weather than any barometer. Several frontier letters mention that when cattle clump unusually tight, it often signals an approaching drop in temperature, or a storm drifting in from the horizon. You cannot say for sure whether that wisdom holds fully true, but the animal's behaviour does leave you wondering whether colder hours are on their way. You walk around to the opposite side of the herd, feeling how their bodies deflect the wind. It's like stepping behind a protective wall made of warm breathing stone. The cold fades even more behind this barrier. You slide your hand across the top of a cow's back, lightly brushing off frost that has begun to collect on the animal's hide. The cow shivers once, then settles. For a moment, you stand quietly, absorbing the warmth, letting your heartbeat slow. The animals breathe in a slow shared rhythm, a tempo that calms you even more than the fire did. Their closeness creates a kind of living shelter that no canvas or coat can replicate. You glance toward your bedroll lying several yards away. The fire casts its glow across the blankets, but part of you hesitates to leave this warm pocket the animals have created. You understand why cowboys sometimes slept with their backs pressed to their horses or nestled against cattle. Warmth is warmth no matter the source. You take one last step closer to your horse, resting your head lightly against its shoulder. The animal sighs, not bothered by your closeness. You whisper a quiet thank you that fades into the night air. The warmth it offers may fade soon, but for now, it keeps the cold from claiming too much of your strength. You eventually push yourself away, though reluctantly, and walk back toward your bedroll. You still feel the warmth lingering on your coat. You glance over your shoulder at the dark shapes of the herd, steady and patient, holding the cold at bay, just long enough for you to gather yourself again. The night deepens, but you carry with you the quiet comfort of borrowed warmth. a reminder that survival out here often comes from unexpected sources. You settle beside your blankets, once more grateful for every living breath that kept the cold from winning. You crouch near the edge of the firelight, rubbing your hands together as the chill seeps back into your fingers. The night has slipped deeper, the cold settling across the prairie like a heavy quilt stitched from starlight and frost. You glance toward your bedroll and then back at the scattered stones half buried in the soil. The time has come to try one of the oldest winter tricks on the frontier, heating rocks until they glow faintly with warmth, then tucking them near your bedding like crude, improvised bedmates. You straighten and step away from the fire circle, scanning the ground for stones of the right size. Cowboys learned quickly that not all rocks behaved the same under heat. Those with moisture trapped inside could crack, sometimes explosively, which made them hazardous. Surviving ranch accounts mention that riders preferred dry, dense stones, collected from exposed ground or creek beds that had been sunbaked earlier in the year. You test one with your boot. It feels solid, cold as bone. You squat and pick it up, brushing away the thin crust of frost on its surface. As you gather a few stones, the wind drifts around you with a cold that seems almost intelligent in the way it slices across your wrists. You hurry back toward the fire, setting the rocks near the hottest part of the embers. The fire crackles and pops small sparks, climbing upward before fading into the night. You position the stones, carefully rotating them now and then with a stick so they warm evenly. The scent of heated earth rises, slowly, subtle and mineral. It reminds you of distant summer days when sunlight warmed the ground so thoroughly you could feel heat through the soles of your boots. Now you're replacing the sun with fire, coaxing that same warmth out of stones that have spent the day freezing under a winter sky. You watch as the first stone darkens slightly, the cold releasing its grip. Several trail memoirs describe this technique plainly. Cowboys often slip these warm stones into the foot of their bedroll or beneath a layer of blankets, letting them radiate heat long after the fire burned down. Some riders even wrap the stones in spare cloth to avoid burning their skin. The method was simple, yet surprisingly effective. You roll one stone with the tip of your stick. It hisses softly where it touches the embers. As you work, you remember a curious detail from a scattered handful of stories. A few cowhands supposedly named their favourite heating stones, claiming certain shapes held warmth longer or cooled more gently. Whether anyone truly believed such distinctions, or whether it was just trail humour lost in the cold hours of the night, is uncertain, especially since the anecdotes vary wildly from one account to another. As the stones continue to warm, you sit back on your heels and stretch your fingers toward the fire. The heat from the embers brushes your palms, gently soothing the stiffness that has settled into your joints. Around you the camp murmurs with life. Horses snort softly. A cow shifts its weight. One of the men rolls over in his blankets and mutters something incoherent. The night breathes in slow, measured pulses. You check the stones again. They are warm now, almost hot, the surfaces glowing faintly in the fire's reflection. You lift one carefully with a scrap of cloth, feeling its gentle heat even through the glove. It radiates like a tiny captured sun. You carry it to your bedroll, placing it near the foot where cold gathers most stubbornly. The warmth begins to seep into the fabric immediately. You return for the next stone. This one feels heavier, its heat deeper, as though the fire convinced it to remember a summer long gone. You place it near the middle of your roll, tucking it under the first blanket layer. A third stone follows, smaller but hot enough to be useful. You nestle it near your hip, imagining how that heat will ease the stiffness in your muscles once you lie down. When you return to the fire for a fourth stone, you find yourself drawn in by the simple rhythm of the task. Heat the stones, carry them across the camp, place them carefully, repeat. The repetition calms you as though the process itself is an act of survival shared across generations. You understand why so many accounts of winter nights mention this practice with quiet appreciation. You sit again by the fire, allowing the glow to wash over your face. The cold presses at the edges of the camp, testing your defences. The stones now hidden in your bedding each carry a portion of the fire's warmth, a a small stash of heat that will outlive the flames. You take a deep breath. The air is crisp enough to sting your nose, but the warmth from the fire and the stones is steady. A faint rustling catches your attention. The cattle shift closer together, forming a dense cluster against the cold. Their movement stirs the air just enough to send a few sparks drifting across the fire. You watch them climb, twisting and shrinking, vanishing into the sky above. The stars remain cold and distant, indifferent to your small efforts. You stretch your hands again. Your gloves feel warmer now, the heat lingering from the stones you carried. You realize just how much the cold drains from you each minute you stop moving. That is why cowboys valued such small comforts. A bit of warmth bought time. Time bought rest. Rest bought survival. A rider nearby stirs in his bedroll and calls softly that the wind is shifting. You glance toward the horizon. A darker line of clouds hovers low, barely visible. The cold air carries a heavier edge, a warning that the temperature might drop again soon. You quicken your pace as you prepare one last stone, wanting to get it nestled into your bedroll before the next gust arrives. You choose a stone that fits snugly in your palm. It feels alive with stored heat. As you hold it, you think of how remarkable it is that something so simple can have such profound effect. Frontier journals often praise the reliability of heated stones, describing them as a steady companion through winter nights. And while interpretations differ among modern writers about how widely this technique was used, the stones in your hands offer enough proof for tonight. You place the stone carefully near your ribs, just beneath the fold of the blanket where the fabric dips. The warmth spreads instantly. You exhale slowly, letting your body relax at the thought of the comfort waiting for you when you finally lie down. The fire crackles behind you, growing smaller as the wood burns away. You kneel beside your bedroll, feeling the radiating heat through the layers. The stones glow faintly in the dark, not with light, but with temperature, a quiet promise against the cold. You settle down beside the bedroll and let your hands rest on your knees. The night still feels immense, still cold, still unforgiving. But now you have pockets of warmth scattered beneath your blankets, little anchors of comfort that will help you drift into sleep. You look up at the stars, their sharp brilliance unchanged. Then you glance down at your warmed bedding. Between firecloth and stone you have carved a small refuge in the vast winter night, and for now that is enough. You sit close to the fire for a moment longer, letting its shrinking warmth soothe your stiff hands, and then you notice a faint tingling spreading across your fingers. Not the pleasant kind that follows regained warmth, but the thin, sharp warning sign of skin beginning to surrender to the cold. Handling frostbite before it wins becomes an immediate priority, just as it did for cowboys who spent long winter nights with nothing but instinct, grit, and a few half-remembered remedies to keep their extremities intact. You pull off one glove halfway and examine your fingertips. They look pale, almost tinted with grey, and the skin feels oddly smooth, as if it belongs to someone else. The prairie night wastes no time reminding you that cold can be just as dangerous as any predator. Period journals kept by ranch foremen often mention frostbitten fingers appearing within minutes during sudden temperature drops, especially when riders had to handle wet equipment or touch frozen metal. You tuck your bare hand under your arm, pressing it against your ribs where body heat gathers most reliably. The shock of warmth feels electric, painful at first, but necessary. You flex your fingers gently, a sensation flickers back. The fire's heat helps, but relying on flames alone is never enough. Cowboys knew that direct warmth had to be balanced with caution. Too much heat applied too quickly could worsen frostbite instead of easing it. The trick was slow, steady warming. As your hand recovers, you recall an unusual practice noted in a few scattered trail letters. Some cow hands rubbed snow lightly on numb skin, believing the gradual cold to warm transition prevented tissue damage. Whether that method truly offered protection, or whether it simply reflected the limited knowledge available at the time, is difficult to determine, especially since the practice appears inconsistently across different accounts. Tonight you decide not to test that idea. The cold already has enough hold on you. You slip your glove back on, making sure the lining sits properly against your fingertips. Then you examine the other hand, still warm, still functioning. Good. You rub both gloves together, generating friction. The movement sends a faint ripple of warmth up your wrists. Your breath curls into the cold air, drifting like slow smoke. A gust of wind brushes past you colder than before. It carries the sharp edge of night settling deeper over the plains. You pull your scarf higher across your mouth and step away from the fire to check your gear. Handling metal can be dangerous right now, but you must make sure your saddle straps and bedroll ties remain secure. Cowboys on winter drives often woke to find equipment frozen stiff, impossible to use until thawed. Surviving ranch logs frequently mention that riders use their own breath or cupped hands to warm buckles enough to move them. You test the tie on your bedroll, careful not to expose too much skin to the cold. The canvas is already growing rigid edges crisp with frost. You pat it lightly, sending a spray of frost crystals drifting into the air. Even that tiny touch makes your fingers sting again through the gloves. You shake your hands vigorously, forcing blood to return. The movement is small but vital. Cowboys relied on constant motion to keep circulation alive. They swung their arms in circles, stomped their feet, flexed their fingers and toes inside their boots. Anything to keep the cold from setting in. One observation from a 19th century physician who visited several trail camps notes that riders who stayed still too long often suffered worse frostbite than those who kept shifting, even when both groups wore similar clothing. You breathe into your gloves, letting warm air linger around your fingers. The fire crackles behind you, its glow shrinking as the last of the thicker logs collapse inward. You feel the cold creeping along your knuckles again, searching for weakness. You clench your fists, hold them tight for a few seconds, and then release. Warmth flows reluctantly into the tips. As you walk toward the horses, you see one stamping the ground, trying to shake ice from its hooves. You touch its neck, gently letting its body heat soak into your palm through the glove. Animals lose warmth too, but they generate large pockets of heat close to the skin. Cowboys often use this to their advantage. Leaning against a horse or slipping hands beneath a horse's mane offered a short but meaningful reprieve from the cold. You do the same now, feeling the warmth seep into your glove. A small herd of cattle shifts closer together, forming a cluster of living heat. You consider returning to them for another dose of warmth, but your hands feel steadier now. Instead, you pace a slow circle around the camp, keeping your fingers curled and your arms moving. The act of walking helps warm your legs too, preventing numbness from creeping upward. You think again of the odd remedies cowboy lore preserved. Some riders claimed that rubbing a mixture of grease and ash on fingertips prevented frostbite. Others swore by holding a heated stone in a cloth and pressing it carefully to numb skin. A few old letters describe men thrusting their hands quickly into armpits or wrapping them in wool soaked lightly with warm water. With so many conflicting descriptions and so little scientific understanding, it is hard to know exactly which techniques offered real protection and which were simply desperation shaped into routine. You return to the fire and place your hands near the embers again. The warmth creeps up your fingers, slow but comforting. You wiggle them, stretch them, make sure each joint still bends. A deep sense of relief washes through you as feeling returns in fuller waves. The pain of warming numb skin is sharp but reassuring. It means you caught frostbite early before it sank its claws deep. As you warm your hands, you consider how frostbite shapes a rider's confidence. Losing a finger or toe out here could mean losing the ability to grip reins, tie knots, or handle tools. Many men were forced off the trail entirely because of winter injuries like these. You flex your hands again, grateful that you still possess all the tools nature expects you to bring into such a hostile place. The fire settles lower, its embers glowing like small suns beneath a blanket of ash. You pick up a thin stick and gently stir the coals, coaxing a bit more warmth from them. The air swirls with a faint scent of burning pine. You watch the sparks rise and fade, thinking of all the nights cowboys sat just like this, fighting frostbite one finger at a time. You pull your gloves tight once more. Heaters return not fully, but enough to hold off the worst of the cold. You let your hands rest against your thighs, absorbing the warmth your legs have gathered from pacing. The cold wind waits outside the circle of firelight, patient and unyielding. But for now your hands still work, your skin still lives. You take one last slow breath and step back from the fire. The night is far from over, but you have won this small contest. Your fingers remain yours, warmed and alive, and as you prepare for the next challenge the frontier night will deliver you, remind yourself that survival out here is not won through any single act, but through many small, careful decisions layered together like your blankets and your clothes. You move away from the fire, stretching your arms as the cold gathers once again around your fingertips. The air carries a sharper bite now, and you know the moment is nearing, when your boots will decide whether they want to cooperate or turn into stiff frozen sculptures. Keeping boots warm enough to wear is its own nightly battle on the frontier, the kind of challenge cowboys talked about in practical tones tinged with quiet dread. Leather, after all, has its limits. Once it freezes hard, it might as well be carved from stone. You crouch beside your boots and give them a firm tap with the back of your knuckles. The sound is different now, a dull thud that tells you the leather is already beginning to stiffen. You lift one by the pull strap. It resists bending only with effort. Riders of the late 19th century left behind countless notes about this very problem. Winter nights on the plains could turn well-oiled boots into rigid shells that scraped your feet raw or refused to bend at the ankle. Ranch inventories from the era emphasize how much oil, tallow and grease trail crews went through in colder seasons simply to keep their footwear functional. You sit down and pull the boots closer. Wisps of frost cling to the seams, catching the firelight like tiny pale threads. You tilt them on their sides, feeling the cold radiating from the thick soles. A few cowhands resorted to an odd trick on bitter nights. They slept with their boots inside their blankets, pressed against their hips or thighs, hoping the heat from their bodies would keep the leather pliable. That method shows up in a handful of personal letters, usually described with mild embarrassment. Whether it truly made boots easier to wear or simply made the rider's sleep more miserable is hard to pin down, especially since descriptions of its success vary from glowing praise to outright mockery. You turn the boots upright again and check the insides. Cold air spills from them in an invisible draft. You slide your hand in, feeling the interior leather retreat from your touch like something shy. Your fingers brush a stiff crease along the heel. Not good. If that hardens overnight, slipping your foot in will be agony. You remove your glove, grit your teeth, and warm your hand under your arm for a moment, before plunging it back inside the boot. The heat from your skin spreads slowly into the leather. Painful, but effective. Cowboys often use their own hands as heating tools, a small act of discipline that revealed how much the plains demanded. A gust of wind spins across the camp, flicking ash upward and rattling a stray tin cup. You shiver as the cold slides down your collar. Time to work faster. You pull the boots into your lap and rub your palms across the outer surface. The friction warms the leather slightly as you push heat into it. You can smell lingering saddle soap and the faint musk of prairie dust. The scent is familiar, almost comforting, and you understand why boots became such personal items for riders. Each pair carried months of trail stories stitched into the creases. You reach for a small tin of grease kept in your saddlebag. The lid pops open with a reluctant scrape. Inside, the mixture looks firm, almost waxy in the cold. You dig out a small amount with your fingertips and begin massaging it into the boot's surface. The leather absorbs it slowly at first. Then the grease melts slightly under your touch, creating a thin sheen that glows in the firelight. Notes preserved in ranch supply logs confirm that regular oiling was not a luxury but a necessity. A well-maintained boot lasted through storms, river crossings, and long nights in freezing camps. A neglected one could split along the seams or harden so much that it bruised the wearer's ankles. You rub more grease into the heel, working it into the troublesome crease. The warmth from your hands and the protective coating begin to soften the leather. A subtle give returns to the material. You press your thumb into it. It bends. Not much, but enough. Behind you, one of the horses shakes itself, sending a cascade of frost from its mane. The sound makes you smile. The horses hate cold leather too. Riders sometimes warmed a bit of their tack before saddling up in freezing weather, placing straps or bits near the fire so the first contact with the horse's skin would not cause it to flinch. A few trail stories even mention men tucking bridle pieces under their coats overnight. Whether that was efficient or merely desperate is uncertain, given that only scattered recollections reference the habit, and no two describe it quite the same way. You return to your boots, setting them close enough to the fire to warm, but not so close that the leather risks drying out or cracking. A delicate balance. Too little heat and they freeze again. Too much and they become brittle. You tilt them slightly, allowing warm air to flow into the openings. The fire exhales in gentle waves, brushing across the leather like a slow-moving hand. You feel satisfaction as the boots begin to darken, in patches, a sign of warmth taking hold. You slide your fingers along the inner lining once more. It feels less punishing now, pliable enough to coax into shape. You tap the heel against the ground. The sound is softer, less like hitting stone. You flex the boot gently, watching the leather respond. Better. Much better. You look at the second boot. It will need the same treatment. You sigh and pick it up. This one feels colder, as if it resented being ignored even for a moment. You rub your palms along the surface, coaxing warmth through friction. The cold travels up your arms despite your efforts, and you pause for a moment to wiggle your fingers and breathe warmth back into them. You spread another thin layer of grease across the boot, paying special attention to the toe box and the stiff upper section. Cowboys often believe the top of the boot was the first part to freeze because it caught the wind. Many riders stuffed spare cloth into their boots at night to help keep the shape and hold warmth. Some used dried grass. At least 2 old letters mention socks being sacrificed for this purpose, which is either resourceful or reckless, depending on how many spare socks a man carried. The accounts offer no consistency on that point. As you work, the fire dims a little, and you add a few smaller logs to keep it alive. Flames rise again, flickering orange across your boots. You angle them carefully, letting the warmth penetrate the leather, but keeping them at a safe distance. You have heard stories from experienced drovers about boots scorched beyond repair because someone placed them too close to the coals in desperation. Whether those stories were cautionary tales or true events is impossible to determine now, though the image is easy enough to imagine. After several minutes of careful warming, the second boot begins to soften. You flex it lightly, feeling the leather give beneath your hands. A wave of relief washes through you. If both boots cooperate, the morning will be far kinder. You set them upright beside your bedroll, sheltered from the wind, but still close enough to the fire to hold their warmth a while longer. You know they will stiffen again before dawn, but not as severely as before. The grease, the heat, and your hands have given them a fighting chance. You sit back, stretching your legs, letting your hands hover near the fire. The cold presses close around the circle of light, waiting for its next opportunity. But for now, your boots live. They remain flexible, wearable, loyal. You imagine slipping your feet into them at sunrise, feeling their warmth instead of wincing at their hardness. You imagine walking across frozen ground with leather that bends instead of cracking. Small victories on the frontier often look like this: warm boots, warm fingers, warm breath. You glance once more at your carefully arranged footwear, then lean back on your hands, grateful for the modest success. The night is far from over, but you have outsmarted one more piece of the cold. You rise slowly from where you are tending your boots, stretching your back, as the cold night presses against your shoulders. The air around you has changed. It feels heavier, sharper, carrying the unmistakable scent of ice, settling deeper into the land. Snow is coming. You can sense it the same way cowboys once did, not through instruments or charts, but through the quiet signals the prairie gives off when the temperature drops into a deeper register. Snow as friend and foe has shaped winter on the frontier since the first riders pushed cattle across these open spaces. You tilt your head upward. The stars that were sharp a moment ago now look slightly blurred, as if a thin veil has been drawn between you and the sky. Many riders wrote in their journals that the dimming of stars was the surest sign snow would arrive within hours. Some noted it casually, others described it with dread. The consistency of that observation across different regions suggests that it was more than superstition. It was environmental awareness shaped by necessity. You take a slow walk beyond the glow of the fire. The ground crunches beneath your boots, each step loud in the frozen silence. A faint dust of frost coats the grass, sparkling like tiny shards of broken glass. You brush your glove across a stalk and watch the frost scatter. The air feels different now, thick and still the way a room feels before a candle blows out. Snowfall on the plains rarely announces itself with drama. It slips in quietly, a patient visitor with unpredictable intentions. As you breathe, the cold stings your nostrils and the moisture turns to crystals at the edge of your scarf. You take another step and feel something softer beneath your boot. You crouch and place a hand on the ground. A new texture greets your palm, the first thin sprinkling of snow too light to see clearly, but enough to alter the soil's surface. Cowboys notice changes like this immediately. Even a dusting of snow could make horses cautious and cattle restless. Your fingers trace the delicate flakes. The cold burns faintly where it touches your skin. You stand again, breathing a slow cloud into the quiet night. Snow on the frontier could be either a blessing or a curse. If you had to track cattle, snow made trails easier to read. If you needed water, snow could be melted. If you needed insulation for your bedroll, a carefully packed layer of snow could block wind surprisingly well. Diaries from winter drives occasionally describe cowhands building low ridges of packed snow to shield themselves during sudden gusts. But snow could also turn a routine night into a deadly test. Even an inch or two made travel dangerous. Horses slipped, wagons stuck, cattle panicked. And when snow piled deep, freezing temperatures could drag entire herds down. One old rancher's account describes a storm so severe that cattle suffocated beneath drifts their bodies only discovered when spring thaw revealed the truth. You rub your arms through your coat, feeling the fabric stiffen as cold concentrates against your sleeves. A light flurry begins around you, each snowflake drifting slowly, quietly, as if hesitant to land. They glow faintly in the fire's distant light. You reach out and catch one on your glove. It melts instantly, leaving only a tiny wet mark that freezes within seconds. The snowfall thickens. Soft, slow, persistent. You tilt your face upward, letting the flakes fall onto your skin. They sting lightly before turning cold and wet. You wipe your cheek and take a deeper breath. You remember reading about a curious technique some riders used in deeper winter. A few men claimed that sleeping directly on snow if they packed it tightly, first, created a more even surface and trapped cold air beneath them, preventing their body heat from sinking into the frozen ground. This strange method appears in only a few scattered notes, and interpretations differ about how practical or common it was. Still, you can imagine someone trying it during desperate nights when the ground froze too hard to scrape. As the snow continues to fall, you move back toward the campfire. The flames hiss softly as flakes land on them, extinguishing tiny sparks. The fire shrinks a little, annoyed by the interruption. You add a few dry branches, watching them catch slowly as the snow dampens their edges. A horse snorts loudly, shaking snow from its mane. You hear its hooves shifting restlessly against the hardening ground. Horses react differently to snow depending on the depth. With a thin layer, they grow cautious but calm. Once it becomes thick enough to brush their ankles, some start to grow anxious. Riders knew this well and often spent extra time soothing their mounts during snowfalls. You step close to your horse and stroke its neck through your glove. Its coat is warm beneath your touch, but snowflakes cling stubbornly to the fur. You brush them away gently. The animal leans into your palm for a moment, then exhales a long stream of warm breath that fogs into the air between you. The cattle shift too, adjusting their formation. Their hooves crunch repeatedly as they cluster together. You take a moment to observe their behavior, noting how they align their bodies at a slight angle to the wind. Cattle always seem to know where the harshest air is coming from. Riders use that instinct to position their bedrolls strategically, trusting that the herd would naturally orient in the safest direction. But why cattle lined up the way they did remains an open question among those who study animal behavior on the frontier. Some say it was purely instinct. Others claim it responded to subtle variations in wind temperature. No definitive answer survives. You crouch and gather a handful of fresh snow, squeezing it lightly. The texture shifts, becoming sticky enough to pack. Snow like this can serve as insulation. Cowboys used packed snow to block openings in makeshift shelters, or to weigh down canvas edges so wind could not blow cold air underneath. You test the pack again, confirming its density. Useful if the wind grows wild later. Snow falls faster now. Not a storm, not yet, but enough to coat your coat and hat. You brush off a thickening layer from your shoulders. The flakes melt quickly against your body heat, soaking through the outer canvas of your coat. This moisture could become a problem if the temperature drops further. Wet cloth stiffens into icy armour, turning every movement into pain. You step toward your bedroll, checking the heated stones beneath the blankets. Snow dusts the canvas, forming small wet spots that freeze almost instantly. You wipe them away and tighten one of the folds. The stones continue to radiate warmth, creating a protective cocoon that the drifting snow cannot easily steal. You take one final slow walk around the camp. Snowflakes swirl in circles around your legs, whispering against your boots. The prairie looks transformed, as if someone brushed a thin coat of powdered silver across the landscape. The moon hides behind a thickening veil, reducing the world to shades of grey and white. Despite its dangers, the snow hushes the night into something gentle. Sound grows soft, edges blur, even the cold feels deeper but somehow quieter. You breathe in the crisp air and let the moment settle. The night is changing, shaping itself into something new with each flake that touches the earth. You feel small but strangely calm, wrapped in the knowledge that snow, for all its cruelty and beauty, is simply another part of the frontier's constant instruction in resilience. You step back toward the fire, shaking snow from your shoulders as the night settles into a deeper chill. The flakes drifting earlier have thickened into a steady curtain, soft at first, then sharper as the wind decides to flex its muscles. Midnight storms and sudden whiteouts do not always announce themselves with thunder or drama. Sometimes they simply arrive, turning the world into a swirling blur where distance, direction, and even sound behave strangely. Tonight you can feel a storm gathering in the air, as if the sky's holding its breath before letting loose. You look upward. The stars have vanished behind a rolling mass of cloud that seems to absorb the faint glow of the moon. The edges of the clouds churn in slow spirals, dark upon dark. Several winter trail journals describe this exact sight, noting how the heavens sometimes looked bruised before a blizzard came rushing across the plains. In those accounts, men often stopped mid-conversation, sensing the shift in weather long before the first icy gust arrived. You turn your face into the wind. It hits with a sharpness that makes your eyes water immediately. Snowflakes sting your cheeks, tiny needles carried by an unpredictable current. As you breathe out, your breath is immediately torn away, shredded into the cold. You pull your scarf tighter and steady yourself. Storm winds on the frontier behave without mercy. They can spin suddenly or drop into dead stillness, or surge in a way that makes you question your own footing. A faint howl rolls through the darkness, not from an animal but from the storm itself. The air vibrates with it, the kind of sound that made cowboys sit up straight in their bedrolls. You step closer to the fire, adding a few branches, hoping to coax stronger heat before the wind grows too fierce. The flames flare briefly, then bend almost horizontally as the gusts intensify. You shield your eyes and glance toward the herd. The cattle are bunching together, pressing flank to flank until they form a tight, uneasy mass. Horses shuffle nervously, shifting their weight, snorting steam into the storm. Notes from winter drives consistently mention that livestock reacted long before humans did, creating natural warnings. When animals tightened their formation this quickly, it often meant the storm's force would escalate within minutes. You step carefully across the camp boots, crunching through the thickening snow. The ground feels uneven now, covered in fresh drifts forming faster than you can track. You crouch and scoop a handful, letting it sift through your gloves. It is dry, powdery snow, the kind that blows easily and fills the air like dust when the wind lifts it. Dry snow often precedes harsher conditions, something mentioned in old meteorological notes kept by ranch owners who recorded weather patterns out of necessity rather than science. A sudden gust blasts across the camp, almost knocking you sideways. Snow erupts upward in a swirling cloud, obliterating sight beyond a few feet. You blink rapidly, trying to clear your vision. The darkness thickens loud with wind. The fire flickers violently, its shape distorted by the rush of air. You hurry to shield it with your body long enough to add another log, hoping to keep at least a small source of heat alive. The snow whips around you, stinging your face. Your eyelashes freeze together, momentarily forcing you to blink hard. You brush the ice away with the back of your glove. Frontier men often describe this sensation in their notebooks, marveling at how quickly moisture turned to ice during storms. One cowhand wrote that by the time he reached for his canteen, frost had already claimed the edges of his hat brim. Such accounts show how frigid these storms could be, even without monumental snowfall. You turn your body against another blast and watch as the cattle shift again. They rearrange their bodies instinctively, forming an angled barrier against the wind. You follow their alignment to understand where the gusts are strongest. The technique of reading livestock during storms appears throughout trail lore, though the exact method varied from rider to rider. Some cowhands trusted cattle more than any compass, while others relied only on their own instincts. Differences in those descriptions make it difficult to know how universal the practice truly was, but tonight you choose to trust the animals. A loud crack echoes through the darkness. You spin around, heart thudding, before realizing it is only a branch snapping in the wind. Yet the sound feels amplified inside this storm, as though the air is carrying the vibration farther than usual. Snowstorms distort acoustics in unpredictable ways. Riders occasionally complained about hearing phantom noises during whiteouts, though whether that came from wind tricks or a tired mind is impossible to say now. You hurry back to your bedroll, brushing off the fresh layer of snow. The stones inside still radiate some warmth, but you realize how quickly that heat will fade once the storm settles at full strength. Snow has blanketed the canvas, and you shake it off again, careful not to expose the blankets to too much dampness. Wet fabric becomes a burden in storms like this. Frozen fabric becomes a punishment. The wind picks up again, swirling snow into your face. You hunch your shoulders, narrowing your stance to keep balance. The world shrinks. Distance disappears. Even the horses blur into vague shapes, moving anxiously in the storm's grip. A few steps in any direction would carry you into darkness so thick you could lose your sense of place. You remember reading a peculiar note in an old cowhand's ledger. He claimed that during winter storms, riders sometimes tied a rope from the bedroll to the fire pit, so they could find their way between the two without getting lost in the white chaos. Whether that method was widely used or only practiced in pockets is unclear. The few references that exist do not agree on details. Still, the idea lingers with you now, appealing in its simplicity. Another gust tears through the camp, lifting a sheet of snow from the ground. It wraps around you before falling heavily at your feet. You steady yourself with a deep breath. The cold rushes into your lungs like ice crystals. You lower your head and move slowly back toward the fire. The flames are struggling now, bowing under the storm's force, but still bright enough to cast a warm glow. You crouch beside it, using your body as a windbreak while feeding it smaller pieces of wood. The flames rise, briefly warm against your face before bending again under the wind. You sit for a moment, letting the fire warm your cheeks. Snowflakes melt instantly upon touching the heat. Your gloves steam faintly as the wetness evaporates. The warmth feels fragile, too fragile, but you hold on to it anyway. Every second of heat matters. The storm continues to build its strength, a swirling presence just beyond the reach of the firelight. You feel small in its shadow, a single figure on a vast indifferent prairie. Yet you also feel grounded, anchored by years of cowboy wisdom, passed through journals, stories, and lived experience. You adjust your scarf again, pull your coat tighter, and then settle beside your bedroll. The night may overwhelm the world with snow and wind, but for now you have your fire, your blankets, your stones, and your knowledge. The storm can rage as it wishes. You will face it one breath, one adjustment, one warm moment at a time. You pull your scarf tighter around your face as the storm's force begins to ease, leaving behind a cold so sharp it feels carved. The wind has thinned to a low hiss, but the air still trembles with the memory of its earlier fury. The snow settles into quiet drifts, softening the camp's harsh edges. You take a careful step away from the fire and listen to the night shift into a different kind of danger, the kind carried not by weather, but by unseen creatures moving just beyond the veil of darkness. Coyotes, mountain lions, and freezing fear often travelled together on the frontier, especially after heavy snowfall gave predators an advantage. You move slowly around the camp perimeter, your boots sinking into powder that squeaks faintly underfoot. A cold breeze brushes your cheek, carrying the distant, haunting yips of coyotes somewhere along the ridge. Their calls overlap in strange harmonies, rising and fading like ghostly laughter. In writings left by several seasoned trail hands, coyotes appear frequently as nighttime companions, scavengers that circled camps in hopes of scraps or weak animals. Despite their eerie calls, they rarely attacked healthy adults, but they had a knack for testing your nerves. You pause beside a low clump of snow-covered brush. Something shifts beyond it. You squint, letting your eyes adjust to the moonlit landscape. A shape glides low to the ground, sinuous and silent. Not a coyote. Larger, heavier. You freeze, breath slowing, feeling the cold settle into your bones. Mountain lions rarely featured in cheerful cowboy stories, but the men who lived out here left enough descriptions to make you cautious. Reports from the period make it evident that lions followed herds and camps during winter, drawn by the scent of animals weakened by storms. You shift your weight and narrow your stance. The shape pauses watching. Its outline blends with the dark, making distance hard to judge. You place your gloved hand on the hilt of your knife, not to fight a lion head-on, but to remind yourself that you're not defenseless. You feel your heartbeat quickening in your throat. A second gust of wind sweeps fresh snow across your boots. The shape disappears behind the ridge as quietly as it came. You exhale slowly, aware that your fear has warmed you more effectively than the fire. Encounters like this were not unusual, though they were rarely spoken of casually. In a few frontier letters, riders described nights when mountain lions hovered at the edges of camp, drawn close by winter scarcity. Those letters hinted unease, but also resilience, as if cowhands accepted the presence of predators as part of the prairie's unspoken bargain. You continue your patrol, stepping lightly, letting your ears guide you. Snow muffles most sounds, but every now and then you catch the faint crunch of something moving. Whether it is an animal or the shifting of ice, you cannot be sure. Trail anecdotes sometimes mention strange noises in winter camps, that no one could ever identify noises that left men staring into the dark with hands clenched inside frozen gloves. The accounts differ enough that it is hard to tell whether these noises were wildlife weather or simply nerves stretched thin by long nights. Your horse snorts, alerting you more effectively than any alarm. You hurry toward it, boots kicking up small clouds of snow. The animal tosses its head and stomps a hoof, scanning the dark with wide eyes. You run your hand along its neck, soothing it. The warmth beneath its coat seeps into your fingers. Horses sense predators before humans do, reacting to subtle movements or scents carried on the wind. Riders of the era often trusted their horses more than their own instincts during winter nights, a detail that appears consistently across ranch writings. You stroke the horse's muzzle and glance toward the cattle. They have clustered tightly again, forming a defensive circle. Their bodies create a barrier of heat and protection. The air around them feels different, warmer, but also tense. Cattle do not fear coyotes in small numbers, but the presence of a mountain lion, even one passing through, can unsettle them. You watch their ears pivot in unison, listening for threats. A soft rustling catches your attention near a snow-covered tumbleweed. You crouch, peering closer. Two small glowing eyes reflect the firelight. A coyote stands, half hidden, its fur dusted with snow. Its breath rises in small clouds. The animal tilts its head, curious rather than aggressive. You hold still. Coyotes test boundaries, especially on bitter nights when hunger outweighs caution. They may approach camp in hopes of scraps or weak calves. In some scattered accounts, cowhands described coyotes attempting to slip into camp to steal bits of meat or explore bedrolls. Whether those stories capture frequent behaviour or only a handful of bold animals is unclear. The details vary widely among different writers. The coyote turns vanishing into the snow with a flick of its tail. You release the breath you are holding and stand. Your joints protest. The cold has crept in deep, numbing your knees, tightening your shoulders. You shake your arms, forcing blood to move. Fear keeps you alert, but it cannot warm your muscles forever. Another sound breaks the quiet, a low growl carried on the wind. You freeze again. It fades quickly as if swallowed by snow. You turn your head slowly, straining to hear more. Nothing. Just the wind hissing along the grass. The prairie has a way of bending sound, warping distance. Some winter nights amplify noises while others swallow them completely. Weather notes left by a rancher in the 1870s describe these strange acoustic shifts, though he never offered an explanation for them. You take a few careful steps backward toward your fire. Each step feels heavy as though the cold has settled into your boots. The flame flickers weakly, but it is a beacon nonetheless. You sink into a crouch beside it, letting the heat touch your cheeks. The glow feels reassuring, and for a moment you stop scanning the darkness. The animals gradually calm again. The cattle shift into a looser formation. Your horse lowers its head. The tension lifts from the camp like steam rising from a cup of warm coffee. You rub your hands together, though they barely warm. The fear that spiked through you leaves behind a lingering shiver, both from adrenaline and cold. You stare into the embers. They pulse softly, tiny red hearts inside the ashes. You imagine how many cowboys stared at similar coals, replaying near encounters with shadows that moved too smoothly, too silently. Many of those nights never made it into journals. Fear leaves impressions, not always words. You pull your coat tighter, feeling its weight settle across your shoulders. The wind remains restless, shifting now and then with a low groan. But the storm has passed. The predators have gone for now. And you, still breathing, still warm enough to move, settle deeper into the firelight. Sleep will not come easily after such encounters. The night still holds mysteries beyond the reach of the flames. But you have defended your small patch of safety. You have watched the dark and walked its edges. For now the frontier gives you a moment of peace, and you let it in one steady breath at a time. You ease yourself down beside the fire again, but the calm does not last. The wind begins another slow rise, a deep inhalation across the prairie that turns the air harsh and unsteady. Wind that steals sleep is not simply uncomfortable out here. It is a persistent needling force capable of unravelling warmth, rattling nerves and shredding whatever small nest of comfort you built. You feel the first long gust brush across your coat, slipping between layers with clever precision, and you brace yourself. The fire flickers violently, bending low before straightening like a stubborn spine. You cup your hands around the flame for a moment, coaxing it back towards stability. In the accounts kept by trail bosses' winds, this sharp are described as the greatest nightly torment of winter drives. Even when temperatures stayed above freezing, wind could drain heat from a body faster than still air many degrees colder. This detail appears often enough in both letters and tally books that its accuracy feels beyond doubt. You adjust your bedroll, nudging it close to a saddle placed deliberately as a windbreak. The leather creaks in the rising gale and snow dusts off its top edge. You push the blankets tighter, tucking each fold as if sealing cracks in a fragile fortress. The wind tests every inch with probing fingers. You hunch deeper into your coat and try to focus on the heat the stones still radiate under your bedding. But the wind keeps prying at your thoughts, pulling them away from warmth and into the rising dark. Another gust arrives, this one strong enough to shove your shoulder sideways. You stagger slightly, plant your boots and steady your breath. You watch the fire bow again, sparks skittering away like tiny red insects fleeing danger. The smoke turns wild, whipping sideways into the night. You lift your collar to shield your eyes. Smoke in a windstorm stings worse than snow. A distant thump catches your ear. One of the cattle kicks the frozen ground, irritated by the sudden burst of cold air. You listen carefully, noting how the herd shifts position, turning their bodies in the same direction, aligning as if guided by some private agreement. trail writings kept by several ranch families note that herds almost always turn to face strong winds, using their shoulders as shields. This behaviour helped cowhands predict the direction of incoming gusts before feeling them. You glance at the cattle, now grateful for the unspoken warning they provide. But wind on the plains is not only predictable, it also carries strange surprises. You recall an unusual entry from a weather-beaten pocket diary. The writer claimed to hear voices during strong winter winds, whispers drifting across the grass like fragments of a forgotten conversation. The detail could be imagination exhaustion, or the peculiar acoustics created by gusts moving through dry brush. Without more accounts supporting it, the truth of that observation remains uncertain. Tonight, though, with the wind rising round you, you understand how easily such illusions might form. A loose flap of canvas from someone's gear snaps loudly, startling you. The noise cuts through the night like a whip crack. You hurry to secure your own belongings before the wind carries anything away. You tie down your blanket, roll more tightly, pushing extra snow along its edges to keep it anchored. Snow can be an ally when wind grows vicious. Packed properly, it becomes a weight that keeps canvas from lifting or twisting. You sit again, but sleep still feels far away. The wind hits you in pulsing waves, each one colder than the last. It enters every gap, the small opening near your collar, the seam beneath your glove, the tiny slit where your coat meets your scarf. You adjust again and again, yet the cold still gets in. Cowboys wrote often about this silent infiltration, describing how wind turned even thick clothing into insufficient protection. Some men swore that wind seemed to wait until they were almost asleep before launching its fiercest attacks. Your fire struggles. The flames flick and gutter threatened by every new gust. You nudge a few glowing coals together, trying to give the flame a stronger foundation. A small flare rises, then bows again in surrender. You shake your head, forcing yourself to focus instead on the warmth still trapped beneath your bedroll. Those heated stones remain your most dependable allies. The wind continues, whistling, growling, moaning as it threads through brush and abandoned roots. This sound changes constantly, as if the night itself was speaking in broken syllables. In several frontier reports, drovers mentioned that windstorms often disrupted sleep more than cold or predators combined. Some men confessed they barely slept at all during windy nights, choosing instead to sit upright, wrapped in blankets, listening to the strange music of the gusts until dawn relieved them. A new blast surges through camp, rattling tin cups, shaking saddle horns, and sending a shower of sparks upward. You instinctively shield your face. The fire flares, dangerously flames whipping in unpredictable arcs. You lean in, using your body to block the harshest gusts until the flames settle back to their core. A faint smell of singed fabric warns you to step back before you get too close. Your eyes water from the smoke and your throat feels dry and cold. You rub your gloves together and stamp your feet. Without movement, the wind would freeze you in place. You glance at your horse again. It stands with head bowed, facing directly into the gale. Its mane flutters wildly, and you can see its muscles tensing beneath the coat. The horse endures the wind with a stoic patience that humbles you. You sit near the fire once more, pulling your coat over your knees, letting the warmth crawl slowly across the fabric. The wind still howls, but you feel a thin line of comfort return. You close your eyes briefly, trying to imagine stillness, trying to lull yourself into sleep, but the gusts push at you constantly. They poke your ribs, tug your sleeves, whisper cold warnings against your skin. Sleep comes in tiny fragments, a few seconds at a time. Your head dips, then lifts again as the wind shoves against your shoulder. Each moment of rest feels fragile, as though it might crumble at the slightest pressure. The wind is endless, patient, tireless. Eventually exhaustion begins to outweigh discomfort. Your breathing slows, your heartbeat steadies. The wind remains cold and persistent, but your body finds a way to ignore it for a short while. You lie back against the partially warmed blankets, curling inward to protect the last pockets of heat. The fire hums faintly. The cattle settle. The horse stands guard, and though the wind continues its relentless song across the plains, you drift into a light flickering rest, holding warmth like a secret in the hollow of your chest. You raise your head from the shallow doze the wind allowed you, blinking away the thin crust of frost that formed on your eyelashes. The fire has dwindled into a bed of drowsy coals, glowing like faint embers beneath a sheer veil of ash. Around you the night settles into that eerie hush that follows a storm. No gusts now, no swirling snow. Just a long, heavy quiet that wraps itself around the camp. It is in this stillness that you hear at first, a low hum, a small vibration of sound drifting from one of the riders a few yards away, trail songs against the cold. You sit up slowly, stretching your back, and listen more closely. The voice is soft, barely carrying above the faint crackle of the coals, a slow meandering tune without clear words, as if the singer is humming more to himself than to anyone else. Cowboys often leaned on simple melodies to fend off the cold and steady their nerves, especially during winter nights when silence felt too empty. Letters written by a few night-herding cowhands note that singing kept both the singer and the cattle calm, slowing the heart rate and easing the twitchy restlessness that frost and darkness bring. You rise and step closer to the fire, warming your hands over the faint glow. As you listen, the soft hum becomes clearer, a low rhythmic tune rising and falling like a quiet tide. The simple curve of melody is oddly comforting. It is neither cheerful nor sad, simply steady. You feel your tension begin to loosen, almost against your will. The sound threads through the night, weaving warmth where the fire can no longer reach. You take a few steps to the edge of camp. Snow crunches softly beneath your boots. Beyond the fire's reach, the cattle shift restlessly, tails flicking, breath rising in pale plumes. You notice a cow lift its head ears, cupping toward the sound. Livestock respond instinctively to human voices. Trail bosses from the era wrote repeatedly that cattle settled faster when riders sang during late-night watches. The vibrations of music, even faint ones, seemed to ease their nerves. Whether this response came from true recognition or simple association with familiar presence is something modern interpreters still puzzle over, since accounts vary from herd to herd and rider to rider. You lean against your saddle for support and let your eyes adjust to the darkness. The hum drifts from the far side of the fire now as another rider picks up a different tune. This one is slightly more structured, with a handful of actual words slipping through the night air. Something about a river, something about a far-off place. The meaning does not matter. The rhythm does. You find yourself breathing along with it. The night feels less oppressive, the cold less personal. A memory surfaces from something you once read. One cowboy claimed that singing prevented his teeth from chattering. He insisted the vibration of his vocal cords kept his jaw warmer. That note appears only once in the archive, you recall, scribbled in the margin of a longer letter. Whether he truly believed it, or meant it as a bit of frontier humour, is impossible to know now, since no other document seems to echo the sentiment. Still, you imagine yourself humming for warmth, and decide the idea might have some instinctive logic behind it. You step toward the cattle, checking them as riders did on all winter nights. Your horse follows you with a slow, deliberate gait, its hooves crunch softly. When you rest your hand on its neck, you feel its warmth pulsing beneath your glove. Steady, reassuring. You hum a little yourself, almost without thinking. Just a faint thread of sound. Your horse flicks an ear and settles more firmly beside you. You walk the perimeter of camp, letting your tune continue in a low register. The rhythm matches your breath. The cold still bites, but not as sharply. You keep your voice steady, letting the melody fall into repetition. Cowboys sang for many reasons: boredom, fear, loneliness, habit. But above all, they sang to keep the herd still. Cattle frightened by darkness or predators could stampede in blind panic, turning a quiet night into chaos. A human voice drifting across the prairie reassured them that their guardians were awake. As you pass the far edge of camp, you notice the cattle breathing in slower rhythms. The clouded plumes rising from their nostrils grow more even, A few young ones nuzzle close to the older animals. The snow beneath their hooves has been flattened into smooth patches from earlier shuffling. The peacefulness feels delicate, as if carried on a thin thread of sound. You stop and lift your eyes to the sky. The clouds have thinned just enough for a few stray stars to peek through, shimmering faintly. Their quiet light seems to harmonize with the humming around camp. You feel a calm you did not expect. The prairie is still immense and merciless, but in this moment it also feels gentler. You let the tune taper off and simply listen. The other rider's voice drifts in slow waves, accompanied by the soft rustle of cattle settling. The fire crackles faintly behind you. It is as if the entire camp breathes in time with the melody. Then, almost too quietly to notice, another voice joins in, a low baritone hum threading beneath the first. Two melodies intertwine, weaving a richer texture into the night. Trail songs often layered like this on the frontier. Riders would pick up a tune someone else began not to perform, but to pass the time and ease each other through the long hours. Some tunes migrated from herd to herd, carried by men who barely remembered where they learned them. One journal kept by a young drover details a peculiar moment when cattle responded so strongly to singing that they stopped shifting entirely, standing motionless while the men hummed. The journal does not elaborate, leaving readers unsure whether the reaction came from actual calming effects or coincidental timing. Interpretations vary depending on who reads it. The hum beside the fire grows softer, drifting into a slower rhythm. The rider is growing tired. You feel your own eyelids droop slightly. The calm is infectious. You move back toward your bedroll, careful not to disturb the cattle with sudden noise. The snow crunches softly beneath your steps. You settle onto your blankets and tuck your chin into your scarf. The wind has calmed enough that the stones beneath the bedding still radiate a faint warmth. You slip your hands inside the outer layers of your coat and exhale slowly. The night is still cold, still vast, but your breathing slows with the rhythm of the lingering songs. The world feels less empty, less hostile, more connected to the people and animals around you. You close your eyes to the sound, letting the remnants of melody drift across your mind like a soft tide. The cattle exhale, the horses sigh. The last whisper of a trail song fades into the dark, and you wrapped in blankets and half-warmth realize that on nights like this, a simple tune can hold the entire frontier together. You rise from your blankets with a slow, reluctant breath, feeling the stiffness in your legs from the long night. The sky is still dark, its edges faintly silvered by the suggestion of dawn still far away. The cold has taken hold of the world, and every movement you make reminds you how fragile warmth is out here. You step toward the herd because the time has come for a chore that allows no delay, no matter how brutal the temperature may be, keeping the cattle alive overnight. You walk into the quiet circle of animals, their bodies forming a rough wall of heat and slow motion. Your breath curls in the air like pale smoke. The cattle watch you through heavy-lidded eyes, shifting their weight occasionally as the ground beneath them freezes into uneven ridges. Winter nights push livestock to their limits. Trail journals kept by several foremen mention that herds often face their worst threats, not from predators or storms, but simply from the cold itself. Animals weakened by travel could collapse, and once down many never rose again. You move carefully among them, checking their posture, their breath, their alertness. A livestock crew from one ranch left behind notes, describing how cattle surviving the cold needed constant reassurance, a rider's presence, calm voice, or even the rhythmic sound of boots moving through the snow. You repeat this rhythm now, stepping steadily, letting the cattle sense your reliability. A soft grunt drifts from one of the older cows as you pat its neck through your glove. The steam rising from their hides forms a faint halo around the cluster. It smells warm and earthy, almost sweet compared to the bitter cold that clings to everything else. You place your hand on one cow's shoulder, feeling its heat seep into your glove. That warmth holds your fingers for a few precious seconds before the cold tries to steal the sensation again. As you check a younger heifer that seems particularly restless, you remember a curious little instruction found in a set of old ranch notes. Some riders would gently nudge anxious cattle with their knee, rather than their hand, believing the broader contact of a leg helped calm them more effectively. The document offers no commentary, only the mention of this odd technique. Whether it truly worked or simply felt soothing to the rider remains uncertain, because no other surviving notes seem to mention the method again. You continue your slow circuit. The snow crunches under your boots, each step quiet but firm. A few cattle shift beside you, turning their bodies toward one another like closing shutters. The ground beneath them has grown slick where melted frost refroze into subtle ice patches. You check those spots carefully. Cattle that slip on this kind of terrain can injure a leg or hip, and once injured, winter offers little mercy. In several trail recollections, cowhands stressed that uneven ice caused more nighttime injuries than all predators combined. You bend slightly and inspect one cow's muzzle. Frost gathers at the edges of its nostrils, glinting under the faint moonlight. You brush it away. Its breath warms your hand briefly. The animal sighs, leaning into the moment. You feel a quiet satisfaction knowing your small action helped it breathe easier. Further along, a pair of steers stand shoulder to shoulder, swaying as they conserve energy. Their hooves are half buried in the snow. You clear small patches around them with the heel of your boot. Snow seems harmless, but once compacted into ice beneath a standing animal, it steals warmth from the limbs relentlessly. Winter notes kept by herders emphasize that clearing such spots was essential, though often exhausting on long nights. Those who ignored the task paid for it later when cattle grew sluggish or stiff. A low moan rolls through the herd, not of distress but of discomfort. You turn back, scanning for any sign of weakness. One animal stands apart, trembling slightly. You approach slowly, allowing it time to recognize your presence. When you reach its side, you notice frost collecting heavily along its lower belly, where the wind has struck hardest. You brush it away and speak softly, letting your breath warm the space between you. The animal shifts its weight toward you, and you place a gloved hand along its ribs. Its warmth is faint but still present. You guide it gently back toward the cluster, where the group's collective heat can envelop it. The animal hesitates, then folds into the crowd. Cattle are more resilient when bound together. Ranch records from one northern operation make it clear that herds left too widely spaced lost far more animals to the cold than those encouraged to cluster tight. You circle behind the herd, scanning for dark patches in the snow that signal trouble. Sometimes fallen cattle create depressions with softened snow. You see none tonight, but you do find one cow kneeling, testing the ground. You approach, place your hand under its chin and coax it back to its feet. You rub its neck gently. The animal responds with a small exhale that fogs the air between you. You guide it carefully to a firmer patch. The sky shifts slightly. A band of deeper grey forms along the horizon, hinting at dawn, still hidden, but approaching. The air changes too, becoming heavier, colder, as if the night wants to make a final claim before morning arrives. You blow into your gloves and continue your steady walk, checking the contours of the herd. You glance at your horse. It stands with lowered head steam rising from its mane. You walk over, stroke its muzzle, then check the saddle gear hanging nearby. The leather feels stiffening again. You rub a gloved hand across the straps, helping warm them slightly. The horse nudges your arm gently, reminding you that its needs too are part of the nightly ritual. A distant yip echoes across the plain. Coyotes again, but far off. The cattle lift their heads briefly, then settle once more. You hum a soft tune without thinking, a low vibration meant to reassure. The animals respond with stillness. As you continue your tune, you think of a mention buried in one ranch hand's recollection that cattle responded particularly well to lower-pitched sounds. The writer offered no explanation for this belief, and whether he imagined the effect or truly witnessed it remains ambiguous due to the lack of supporting accounts. You return to the centre of camp, your breath forming pale ribbons of fog. Your hands ache from the cold even through the gloves, but the herd stands stable and alert. No signs of collapse, no animal separated from the group. You feel relief settle across your shoulders like a heavier, warmer blanket. The coals of the fire glow faintly. You kneel beside them and spread your hands over the heat. It is not enough to warm you thoroughly, but it restores movement to your fingers. Behind you the cattle shift, producing soft, steady rustles. Their warmth folds through the night like a quiet promise. Keeping them alive is not heroic, it is simply necessary. But each step you take around the herd, each brush of frost from a muzzle, each soft hum into the frozen air, ties you more deeply into this landscape. You understand why cowboys insisted that tending the herd at night shaped a rider's character more than any daylight chore. You stand once more the cold tugging at your coat, and watch the herd settle as dawn prepares its slow climb. You have done what countless riders before you did. You kept the herd through another winter night with patience, vigilance, and a stubborn will to match the prairie's own. You rub your palms together and step away from the slow-burning coals, letting the quiet of the dark settle around you. The herd stands calmer now, their shape softened by the faint silvery sky. But your night is far from over. Winter travel demands vigilance long after the last cattle check. Night watches that never end are a cowboy's unwelcome companion, stretching time into a long, thin thread that threatens to snap with fatigue. You blink slowly, steadying yourself as you prepare to walk the perimeter once more. You tug your scarf up toward your nose, feeling the cold catch against its fibres. A shallow breath escapes you, drifting upward like a thin ribbon. The snow crunches beneath your boots as you begin your slow patrol. In the notes kept by several trail captains during harsh, northern drives, it is made clear that rotating night guard was essential, not only for the herd's safety, but for the rider's survival. Too long without movement meant your limbs would stiffen until you could barely steer your horse. You start your path near the horses, adjusting the reins gently where frost has collected. Each animal stands quietly, though one stamps its hoof impatiently. You place your hand on its withers. Its warmth rises into your palm, grounding you against the creeping numbness in your fingers. The horse flicks an ear toward the distant dark and you follow its gaze. Nothing moves out there, but the stillness feels thin, as if the world beyond the camp is waiting to exhale. A low hum begins somewhere near the centre of camp, another rider fighting exhaustion with a tune. You allow the hint of melody to accompany your walk. It fills the silence without disturbing it, a companion to your footsteps. You continue along the outer edge of the cattle, moving quietly, listening for anything unusual. Soft shifts and slow breaths greet you, all calm. Halfway through your circle, your eyes catch a faint glow reflecting off a patch of ice where the firelight reaches. It shimmers strangely, almost like moving water. You crouch to examine it. The surface waves under the wind, the thin ice layer bending slightly as the air presses against it. Observations recorded in a few winter journals describe these rippling patches of ice that formed after rapid temperature swings. They often misled tired riders into thinking a stream or puddle lay ahead. Tonight you nearly fall for the illusion yourself. You stand again, arching your back to ease its tightness. Fatigue settles deep into your legs, turning each step heavier. You rub your face with a gloved hand, but even the pressure feels dull through the stiff fabric. Night guard does not offer much mercy. You move because stopping means losing warmth, and losing warmth means losing the ability to move again. A faint rustling draws your attention near the perimeter. You narrow your eyes, tracking the movement. A small shape darts across the snow, a rabbit startled by the shifting shadows. You let out a slow breath. Some herders wrote about how small animals brought strange comfort during night watches, a reminder that life kept moving even when the cold made everything feel still. One old notebook mentions a rider who claimed he always counted 3 or 4 rabbits on his rounds, and if he did not, he felt something was wrong. Whether that habit was mere superstition or a practical way of assessing weather and predator presence is anyone's guess. You continue onward, following a winding path around the camp. The cold presses into you more firmly, now settling into the back of your neck and the joints of your knees. You roll your shoulders to keep them loose. You lift your hands above your head, briefly shaking blood into your fingers. Movement is the only way to keep numbness from taking over. A soft grunt echoes across the herd. One of the cattle shifts again and you pause to observe. It lifts its head, sniffs the air, then lowers it back into the cluster without alarm. You feel your tension ease slightly. Animals are better early warning signals than any human in this darkness. In winter, writings compiled from several ranch families, it is repeatedly noted that cattle grew restless before any threat, a predator, a sudden weather shift, even the approach of another herd. You rely on that instinct now more than anything. You walk toward the fire again, noticing how the coals have dimmed further. You crouch beside them and stir them with a stick. A few sparks leap upward. The brief flare of light reveals the rising mist of your breath and the frost collecting along your coat seams. You add a small log and watch the flames regain a little life. Heat washes across your face, restoring sensation to the tip of your nose. But you do not linger. Night guard is not a task for resting. You rise again and complete your loop, counting each step in your head to stay focused. 100. 200. You lose track somewhere around 300 and begin again. Your mind drifts, but your body keeps moving. Toward the far edge of camp, you notice the horizon has shifted into a deeper tone. A faint pale stripe touches the sky, a subtle hint of dawn preparing to arrive. You know it could still be an hour or more before the sun breaks the landscape open again. Time stretches at night. Some cowhands recorded that winter dawns felt like they were arriving from miles farther away, taking twice as long to reach the prairie. Interpretations of that observation differ widely. Some attribute it to fatigue, others to atmospheric haze, and some simply to poetic exaggeration. You pause near your horse again, brushing snow from its mane. The animal nudges your shoulder, pressing its warm breath against your cheek. The gesture wakes you more effectively than any shout. You smile tiredly and pat its side. Night watches require this kind of quiet companionship. You and the animal standing guard together against the cold darkness and whatever might wander too close. You complete your final circuit, stepping carefully across the crusted snow. The camp is calm, the herd is stable, the world remains intact for now. Your limbs ache from the cold, your eyelids feel heavy. But you have held the line through another long stretch of the night. You return to your blankets, kneel beside them, and let yourself breathe slowly, feeling the quiet pride that comes with enduring what the prairie offers without warning or mercy. The sky brightens another shade. Dawn is coming, not quickly, not easily, but coming all the same. You lift your head from your blankets, blinking slowly as the air around you grows even colder than before. Dawn may be inching its way toward the horizon, but the temperature always seems to fall just before sunrise. The fire has slumped into little more than glowing embers, and the wind that earlier tore through camp has settled into a tense stillness. It is in moments like this that a cowboy faces one of the most delicate decisions of winter travel, whether to risk starting a new blaze in the middle of a storm's aftermath. The blizzard campfire gamble was a nightly calculation, weighed not just for warmth, but for safety, visibility, and survival. You crouch beside the remains of the fire. Thin curls of smoke rise, dissolving into the cold. The embers glow faintly beneath the blanket of ash. You extend your hands, and though the heat is weak, it still pushes gently against your chilled palms. Notes from several winter journeys undertaken by trail crews indicate that a fire scarcely larger than this sometimes served as the difference between a manageable night and a deadly one. Even a handful of glowing coals could warm numb fingertips or keep leather pliable. You glance toward the sky. The clouds hang low, heavy and uneven, suggesting the storm may not be finished. A faint grey grit spins through the air, leftover snow shaken loose from the passing winds. If you stir the fire too strongly, the wind could seize the sparks and carry them across the frozen grass. Cowboys learned early that in dry winter conditions, even snow-covered ground was no guarantee against wind-driven embers. Ranch records preserved from the northern plains include warnings about unexpected grass fires sparked by careless flames during cold, windy nights. You hesitate, sensing the quiet tension in the air. The cold presses against your face. You take a single breath, exhaling a pale plume into the dim light. The fire needs attention, yet you know tending it too aggressively could risk trouble. You kneel and begin slowly rearranging the embers with a smooth stick, careful not to stir them too violently. A soft crackle answers you as a few hidden coals emerge from beneath the ash. Their glow intensifies slightly. You take this as a good sign. You add a small dry twig, placing it gently rather than dropping it. Within seconds, the twig begins to smoulder. Flames lick at its edge. A whisper of warmth rises toward your fingertips. The gamble begins. As you nurse the flames, you recall a peculiar instruction found in an old training booklet prepared for inexperienced riders. Newcomers were advised to shield the fire with their bodies whenever adding fuel during winter storms, not for personal warmth, but to block wind from lifting sparks. The booklet offers no commentary on how successful this method was, and those who studied the document years later noted the lack of consistent follow-up accounts. Whether it was sound advice or just the author's preference remains open to interpretation. You lean forward now, forming a quiet barrier with your shoulders. You add a second twig, then a third. The tiny fire accepts them hesitantly, growing just enough to cast a faint outline on the snow at your feet. The warmth is delicate but welcome. You rub your gloved hands together, gently warming the creases between your fingers. A faint sound reaches your ears, a soft grunt from one of the cattle. You turn your head. The herd has not moved far, but several animals shift and stamp unsettled by the flickering flame. Light behaves strangely in winter storms. It can draw predators, confuse cattle, or reflect off snow in ways that cause unnecessary agitation. In written reflections left by a few trail bosses, it is clear that men debated whether fires during storms calmed or agitated livestock. Some insisted flame offered comfort, while others claimed even small fires startled cattle when wind bent the light. You examine the herd carefully, making sure none appear alarmed. They settle again, lowering their heads. You take this as permission to continue coaxing the flame upward. You slide a larger piece of kindling near the coals. The fire grabs it reluctantly, then releases a soft pop. The warmth grows, rising into your cheeks. You close your eyes briefly, savouring the moment. Winter on the frontier teaches you to celebrate warmth in tiny, fleeting doses. As the flame stabilizes, you reassess the surroundings. The sky carries a muted glow, dawn still distant but preparing. The wind remains quiet, though the shifting clouds suggest it could return. You wrap your coat tighter around yourself, watching the flame flicker steadily. Its presence feels fragile, as if you and the fire share an unspoken pact to stay small, stay steady, and survive together. A memory surfaces from an account kept by a rider who lived through 3 consecutive blizzards in one winter. He wrote about heating the snow itself by pressing warm stones into shallow pits, using the softened surface to create a temporary shield against wind. The idea appears oddly inventive, but almost no other accounts mention using warm snow as a windbreaker. Whether the technique was a personal experiment or a rare trick passed around only in small groups is difficult to determine. Tonight the snow is too powdery for such an attempt, but you hold on to the idea, quietly admiring its creativity. You lean closer to the flame and warm your face, feeling the heat gather along your cheeks and forehead. The warmth sinks deeper, calming the persistent ache behind your eyes. You shift your weight and extend your legs toward the fire, careful not to make sudden movement that might scatter sparks. A faint crackling in the distance draws your attention. The sound is small but distinct, perhaps a falling branch. You straighten your back, listening. The fire continues to burn beside you, but quietly enough that you can still hear beyond it. Nothing follows the crackle. Only silence. The prairie holds its breath. You take a slow breath, letting the warmth of the flame ease the tightness in your chest. You're still aware of the risks, a sudden gust, a wandering predator, the unpredictability of the weather, but the fire's steady glow gives you a sense of fragile control. Winter nights rarely offer much certainty. Sometimes even a small flame feels like a victory. You place one final branch near the coals, tucking it cautiously into the growing warmth. It catches glowing orange at the edges. The fire remains modest, disciplined, bright enough to warm your hands, but small enough to avoid attracting too much attention. You sit back on your heels, letting the glow seep into your bones. The gamble for now seems won. The fire lives, the night holds steady, and you still awake and breathing in this immense winter world, prepare to face whatever the slow-coming dawn brings. You pull your coat tighter as the faint glow of dawn hesitates at the horizon. The storm has eased, the wind is gentler now, yet the cold remains stubborn and profound. You look around the camp and see how exposed everything still feels. Even with the herd clustered and the fire revived, the prairie stretches away in every direction, flat and open, offering little shelter. Improvised shelters from almost nothing were part of every cowboy's winter lesson, and tonight, you decide to build one more layer of protection before the next wave of cold arrives. You step toward a patch of scrub brush just beyond the horses. Its branches sit under a glaze of frost brittle, but still flexible enough to use. Notes left by experienced drovers make it plain that even sparse vegetation could become life-saving material. You brush your gloves across the icy stems, testing their strength. They bend slightly without snapping. Good enough. You crouch and gather an armful of the brush, pulling some from the roots when the branches resist. As you work, the crisp crackle of frozen twigs breaks the quiet. The sound carries across the snow like distant snapping firewood. You return to camp and begin arranging the branches behind your bedroll, forming a low wall to block the cold air that creeps along the ground. As you position the brush, a memory flickers from something you once read, an odd improvisation described in the margin of an old bunkhouse notebook. It mentioned riders weaving their spare rope through branches to create a tighter barrier the way a net holds its shape. The note did not expand on whether this method was effective, and the handwriting was so faded that it offered more mystery than explanation. But tonight you try a loose version of it, threading a length of rope between the branches to hold them together in a rough lattice. The wind picks up slightly, nudging the wall of brush. You watch how the branches bend and settle, absorbing the gust instead of letting it pass through. Encouraged, you gather more detritus, fallen twigs, bits of hardened grass, a few sturdy pieces of sage, and pack them into the gaps. The structure is far from elegant, but it creates a noticeable buffer between your sleeping area and the open plain. You pause and examine the effect. Snow swirls gently against your makeshift barrier, catching in the branches instead of sweeping directly into your blankets. You can almost feel the difference as the cold wind diverts around your bedroll instead of sneaking beneath it. Riders recorded more than once that small windbreaks often did more good than thicker blankets. A physical obstacle slowed the invisible river of cold air before it reached human skin. You move to the opposite side of your bedding and begin reinforcing that area as well. You find another small cluster of brush, this one denser. Its stems hold a stronger scent, woody, almost spicy, released as your hands warm the frozen bark. While working, you recall an interesting detail that surfaced in a handful of regional accounts. Some cowhands believed certain plants, particularly sagebrush, trapped heat better than others when used in makeshift shelters. The idea appears sporadically and inconsistently, suggesting it may have been more folklore than proven method. Still, you weave a few pieces of sage into your barrier, enjoying their scent as you work. Your gloves stiffen from the accumulating frost, but you continue threading each branch with patience. Snow continues to settle. The windbreak grows taller. The cold gathers in your coat sleeves, but the warmth created by the growing shelter motivates you. You step back to assess the progress. The wall now stands half as tall as your knee and extends several feet across, forming a shallow enclosure. You kneel beside it and feel the wind pass overhead, reduced to a whisper instead of a sting. Behind you, the fire casts a soft orange glow. You turn to check it briefly, making sure the embers remain healthy. The small protection you are building would be useless without warmth to support it. You add a thin log, nudging it gently until a small flame flickers through the gap. Heat spreads slowly across the ground, blending into the sheltered space you have shaped. You return to the windbreak and begin pressing snow against the outer edges. The snow compacts easily beneath your glove, forming a more solid foundation. Cowboys learned quickly that snow, when packed tightly, becomes a surprisingly effective insulator. Packed snow cannot steal warmth through the same fast conduction as loose powder. It creates a barrier dull but dependable. You pat it into place, building the outer wall higher until it reaches the height of your shin. You step back again, impressed by the subtle warmth that collects inside the enclosure. It feels like stepping into a pocket of stillness, not warm exactly, but noticeably less harsh. You imagine waking in this spot after a few hours of sleep, grateful to have even a slight protection from the unpredictable winds. A soft sound catches your ear. You glance toward the herd. One cow lifts its head, watching you through the faint glow of dawn. Animals seem to understand the need for shelter even more instinctively than humans. In a few recollections kept by older cowhands, cattle sometimes huddled against man-made windbreaks, drawn to the pocket of calmer air they created. Those same writings also mention that riders occasionally woke to find their shelters partially crushed by animals leaning for warmth. Interpretations of these stories vary, as some describe them humorously, while others warn of the dangers of being rolled over by a half-frozen cow. You move around the camp, scouting for more materials to reinforce your structure. A few low branches lie near the edge of the snow-covered brush line. You gather them swiftly, fingers numbing despite the gloves. You return and slide them into the gaps of your shelter, stacking them at small angles so the wind cannot slip through. The shape grows more irregular but stronger with each addition. When you finish, you crouch inside the enclosure, letting its partial protection surround you. The cold remains, but it no longer slices the air so sharply. Your breath lingers longer inside this space. Your coat feels thicker. Your joints warm slightly as the wind's edge dulls. You rest your gloved hand against the snow-packed wall. The surface is firm, almost polished by the pressure of your palm. You feel a quiet pride blooming in your chest. This shelter is nothing more than brush, rope and snow, but it belongs to you now. It is your creation, your refuge. Out here, building such spaces is as much a psychological act as a survival tactic. You take one last look at your handiwork, then settle on your blankets. The stones beneath them radiate their gentle heat. Your shelter blocks the breeze across your ankles. The fire's glow reaches the gap between the branches. All the pieces fit together in their crude, resourceful way. The dawn still lingers behind the clouds, but you have carved a small sanctuary from an unforgiving night. It is imperfect, temporary and humble, but it is yours. And as you ease down beneath your blankets, letting your eyelids drift slowly towards sleep, the frontier feels just a little less vast, a little less cold, and a little more survivable. You stretch your legs carefully beneath the blankets, testing the stiffness in your knees. The cold has settled deep into the joints, making every movement feel slightly delayed, as though your limbs are thawing from the inside out. You rise slowly, brushing snow from your coat, and begin your first steps around camp. The pale dawn creeps forward, revealing a landscape transformed into a world of glittering frost and uneven patches of shimmering ice. It is in this fragile light that another frontier reality emerges: accidents, falls, and cold brittle gear. You crouch beside your saddle, reaching for the cinch strap. The leather barely bends. You rub it between your palms, noticing how the cold has hardened its surface into something far less cooperative. Notes preserved in various supply logs from winter cattle drives make it plain that gear left exposed overnight often stiffens so severely that riders wasted precious time coaxing flexibility back into it before they could mount up. You feel the truth of those accounts in your hands as the leather resists your attempts to warm it. You set the strap aside and turn to the stirrup. Frost coats its outer edge, glimmering like fine sugar. You tap it with your knuckle. The metal rings with a crisp, high tone that betrays its temperature. It feels almost brittle, as if the slightest pressure in the wrong place might cause it to snap. You press your glove against it until your warmth dulls that ringing cold. As you work, a faint memory surfaces from a scattered set of notes once kept by a trail cook turned rider. He mentioned a peculiar habit of tapping every metal piece of equipment before mounting up, claiming the sound alone told him whether the item could withstand the strain. The entry appears only once, with no elaboration, leaving its purpose ambiguous, perhaps a personal superstition, perhaps a practical gauge of temperature stress. You give the stirrup another gentle tap, half trying the idea yourself, half acknowledging the oddity of it. Your horse snorts behind you, shaking frost from its mane. You move closer, lifting its hoof to check the shoe. The animal tolerates your touch, though its leg trembles slightly in the cold. When you tilt the hoof toward the rising light, you see frost trapped between the shoe and the sole. These small accumulations can make a horse lose traction. Several winter trail letters recount how riders dismounted to chip out frozen clods with pocket knives, especially when riding across icy ridges. You use the back edge of your glove to clear the frost. It falls in tiny crystalline pieces that vanish into the snow. You straighten and stretch your back. A sharp twinge shoots along your spine. The cold affects you too. You take a few steps toward the fire pit, now mostly ashes, before your boot slips unexpectedly on a slick patch of ice, hidden beneath thin snow. You stumble arms, flailing, and catch yourself against a saddlebag. The close call sends a jolt of adrenaline through your chest. You exhale through clenched teeth, realizing just how quickly the frozen ground can betray you. You shake your head, brushing snow from your sleeve. Accidents like that were common fodder in frontier stories. Many of the lighter tales told around bunkhouses involved riders embarrassingly losing their footing in front of their peers. But other stories carried darker edges, accounts of men falling into ravines or twisting ankles so badly they could not ride the next day. Cold, brittle ground masked hazards in cruel ways. The frozen crust often cracked beneath weight, creating sudden collapses that caught even experienced cowhands off guard. Still catching your breath, you walk more carefully this time, testing each placement of your boots. The snow squeaks beneath your feet, brittle and loud. You plant your heel first, then shift your weight slowly. With the sun preparing to rise, the surface temperature fluctuates enough to make ice treacherous. Riders from the period often noted that dawn brought more falls than midnight, because partially thawed patches fooled the eye. You crouch near your bedroll and lift the edge of the canvas. Frost clings to the underside, forming delicate patterns that crumble when touched. The weight of cold on canvas weakens fibres, something you can feel when you run your glove across the surface. You tug lightly. The fabric holds, but only barely. Ranch accounts kept in the Northern Territories describe many bedrolls tearing along seams after freezing solid overnight. You avoid pulling too hard, unwilling to test the limits of your own bedding. Your fingers grow numb again as you handle each fragile piece of gear. You cup your hands around your mouth and breathe warm air into your gloves. The warmth spreads, slowly dulling the ache. You flex your fingers and decide to check your rope next. Coiled rope left out in winter hardens into a stiff spiral holding memory like iron. You unroll a small section and test its give. It resists stiff and unforgiving. A fragment of recollection rises from a faded journal written by an elderly rancher. He described how some riders tucked short rope sections under their coats for an hour before using them, relying on body heat to restore flexibility. The method sounds uncomfortable, and the writer offered no explanation other than calling it poor man's gear warming. Whether this practice held any real benefit or simply reflected a moment of personal desperation remains unclear because no other document repeats it. You coil the rope again and set it near the remnants of the fire where a few coals still offer mild warmth. The rope relaxes slightly. You nod grateful for even small returns of flexibility. Then you move to your saddle. Frost has gathered along its edges, creating sparkling ridges that look beautiful at first glance, but behave like tiny blades against leather. You brush them away with your glove, careful not to crack the surface. When you lift the saddle horn, it feels heavier than usual, weighed down by cold. You rotate it slowly, checking for stiffness in the skirts and straps. The leather does not tear, which is a relief. Saddles could become hazards under freezing conditions. Several accounts preserved in ranch archives describe stirrup leathers snapping mid-ride because the cold turned them brittle. You run your fingers along the edges, inspecting for weak spots. The saddle seems safe for now. A sharp cry echoes across the plain, startling you. You turn quickly, heart pounding. It is only a hawk sweeping low across the frosted landscape in search of movement. You let your breath settle again. But the moment reminds you how easily fear can amplify in the cold, where sharp noises carry farther and echo oddly against icy surfaces. You return to your work, finishing a final inspection of your gear. The sun finally pierces the clouds, sending a thin beam of light across the snow. It sparkles along the frost crystals that still cling to your gloves. The warmth from the sun is faint, barely noticeable, but the little bit of light feels like a promise that the worst of the night is behind you. You gather your belongings, careful with each item. Every strap, every buckle, every seam must be handled with respect. Winter turns the simplest tools into fragile things, demanding vigilance at every step. You feel your breath slow as the cold eases from your lungs. You stand tall, stretching one last time. Your gear is ready, not perfect, not as warm or flexible as you would prefer, but ready enough. You survived another night without losing a saddle, a rope, or your balance. The sun rises another inch, painting the horizon in muted shades of pink and gold. On this frozen morning, even staying upright and keeping your equipment intact feels like a small triumph. And as the prairie brightens, you prepare for whatever the day asks of you next. You stretch your hands toward the faint warmth rising from the embers, letting the glow settle into your fingers. A new calm spreads through the camp as the light grows brighter along the horizon. After the long stretch of wind-snow predators and stubborn gear, you finally feel the weight of companionship returning. Trail companions saving each other was not just a romantic idea from later stories. It was the unspoken truth of winter on the frontier. No one survived a season alone. You rise slowly and look around at the men settling into their early morning routines, each one worn by the night, but steadier for having shared it with others. You spot one rider kneeling beside his bedroll, rubbing his boots vigorously to restore flexibility. His movements are stiff, his face drawn. You walk over and hand him the small tin of grease you used earlier. The relief on his face is immediate. He nods without speaking, too cold or too tired for words. Men on winter drives often traded gear warmth or labour without comment. Frontier-era notes left by several trail captains make it clear that imposing strict rules meant little when the cold began to threaten the group. Cooperation grew naturally born, not from politeness but necessity. You step away, passing another rider who is struggling with a rope frozen stiff as a board. He tugs at it uselessly, breath steaming heavily. Without hesitation, you kneel beside him and help unwind the coil, pressing short sections of it between your hands to soften the fibres. In winter memoirs that have survived the decades, riders frequently wrote that thawing another man's rope was considered an act of quiet loyalty. It was slow, uncomfortable work, but saved someone else valuable minutes when conditions turned dangerous. As you continue around camp, you notice one man limping near the horses. His leg stiffens each time he puts weight on it. You call out softly and he pauses, embarrassed. He explains that he slipped on hidden ice during his watch. You crouch beside his horse and pat its shoulder so it stands steady. You help him lift his leg into the stirrup, steadying his weight until he settles securely into the saddle. His grateful exhale fogs in front of you. He mutters something that sounds like thanks, though. The cold steals most of the sound. You wave it away. Out here, gratitude does not need ceremony. You turn toward the cattle next, checking them one last time before the day begins. Several riders join you, moving without instruction. The herd has tightened again, conserving heat, while the last echoes of night cling to the ground. Together you and the others brush frost from young calves' backs and clear the icy build-up around hooves. Working as a group makes the task faster, more efficient. Early ranch ledgers sometimes mention that herd checks done by 2 men instead of 1 often prevented injury or loss, since 4 eyes caught things 2 eyes missed. As you finish tending one calf, a rider near the back of the herd calls out, his voice hoarse but urgent. You hurry over to find a steer collapsed on its side belly, heavy with frost. Its breath is shallow steam drifting weakly from its nostrils. You kneel beside it, your gloves brushing the cold-packed snow. 2 men join you. One begins rubbing the steer's flank to stimulate circulation. Another clears the snow around its legs. You retrieve one of the warmed stones from your bedroll and place it gently against the animal's side, letting your gloved hand guide the heat into the hide. You've read recollections from several ranch operations describing how teamwork like this often revived animals that otherwise would have frozen. The details vary. Some described rubbing the animal vigorously, others mentioned forcing warm air toward its muzzle using cupped hands. The methods differ across accounts, leaving no agreed-upon strategy, but the shared stories make one truth clear. The combined effort mattered more than the specific technique. You see that idea in motion now as the steer shudders, then takes a deeper breath. Minutes pass. Then finally the animal lurches upright, swaying heavily before regaining its footing. A ragged cheer rises from the men, not loud but full of relief. You step back, chest rising with your own quiet victory. This is what shared labour feels like on the winter frontier, effort layered on effort, until the impossible becomes merely difficult. You settle beside your horse again. One rider approaches with a dented tin cup of steaming coffee. He offers it to you without a word. You accept it gratefully, wrapping your hands around the warmth. The smell brings a small smile to your face. The man waves off your thanks with a tired shrug. You both know the coffee is a lifeline more valuable than gold in this hour. You hand back the cup and breathe in the gathering light. The faint pink of dawn spreads wider across the sky, softening the hard edges of the prairie. A rider nearby cracks a weak joke about the storm's fury. Another replies with a groan, rubbing his frozen jaw. Their laughter is thin, but it works its way through the cold, creating a fragile warmth that lingers around the fire pit. You notice a loose strap dangling from your saddle. Before you can adjust it, another hand reaches out the rider you helped earlier. He tightens it with a few practice motions, then claps your shoulder once before moving on. His gesture is brief, but the meaning behind it settles into your chest like a final ember of warmth. Help offered becomes help returned. As the sun begins to rise fully, the camp stirs into life. Bedrolls are shaken out. Coals are collected. Saddles are examined, mended, or coaxed into flexibility. You and the other riders work without discussion, each one instinctively knowing where to stand and what needs doing. It feels almost choreographed, though nothing was planned. This is the quiet bond forged in winter. One rider's strength supporting another's weakness. One man's fire warming another's shivering hands. One shared glance confirming a task completed. You realize that no gear, no technique, no bedroll could have carried you through the night alone. Survival here is collective, stitched from dozens of small actions performed side by side. You take one last look at your companions as the sun finally clears the horizon. Their silhouettes stand against the glowing sky, tired but upright. Together you endured the cold's worst offerings. Together you step into the day. You rub a numbed thumb across your eyelid and steady yourself as the sun's first light spills across the snow. Morning reveals every ridge, every crusted footprint, every fragile line the cold carved overnight. Yet as the sky brightens, something else becomes sharp and undeniable: your hunger. After a night like the one you survived, the simple act of eating becomes as important as tending the fire. Cowboys ate for warmth, before they ate for pleasure, and you feel that truth gnawing at your ribs as you shuffle toward the cook's gear. You kneel beside a canvas sack half buried in frost. Its surface is stiff, the cold having tightened it like old paper. You peel it open with clumsy fingers, revealing slabs of last night's biscuits hardened by the freeze. In several trail accounts from winter cattle, drives riders recorded that leftover biscuits often turned rigid enough to chip a tooth. Yet men still carried them, because they lasted well and could be softened with heat. You hold one to your lips and feel its icy weight as though the night's cold had seeped fully into its core. You settle near the coals, placing the biscuit on a flat stone close enough to warm but not scorch. As it thaws, you dig through another sack. Salt pork lies inside, nearly frozen pale lines of fat dulled to a stiff sheen. You cut a narrow strip, wincing as the knife slips against the solid flesh. The cold transforms even tough pork into something like wood. You lift it to the rising warmth of the fire, letting the heat loosen its fibres. As you wait, a faint memory comes back to you, the mention of a peculiar trick scribbled inside a small camp journal. The writer claimed that blowing warm air across frozen pork before slicing made the blade glide more easily. The remark stands alone, nested between unrelated notes about saddle repairs and snow depth. Whether this odd method had merit or was merely an experiment by one inventive rider is impossible to determine. You try it anyway, exhaling across the strip. Your breath fogs instantly. The pork softens only a fraction, but enough to let your knife finish its work. You place the meat onto a metal plate, holding it above the embers. The fat begins to glisten, then sizzle, releasing a smell that instantly stirs your appetite. The aroma is smoky, sharp, and comforting. Your stomach tightens in response. Hunger on the frontier often carried a deeper edge in winter, sharpened by the cold's unrelenting drain on energy. In supply notes kept by several ranch hands, the highest consumption of food occurred in the coldest months as bodies burned through calories in their struggle to stay warm. While the pork cooks, you crumble part of the softened biscuit into a tin cup of water and place it near the fire. The edges swell slowly, drinking in the heat. You watch the transformation with a kind of weary gratitude. Food that felt like stone moments ago becomes something edible again. You lift the cup, swirl it gently, and take a small sip. The flavour is faint but warm, and warmth is everything right now. A sudden sneeze erupts from one of the men across the camp. You glance over and see him rubbing his nose vigorously as frost clings to his moustache. He lifts a piece of jerky to his teeth, bites down and grimaces as it refuses to bend. Jerky too becomes unyielding in the cold. Some riders from early winter diaries noted that they tucked strips of it inside their coats as they rode, letting body heat soften the meat slowly. You watch your companion attempt something similar, now sliding the jerky under a shirt with a pained sigh. Your own pork is nearly ready. You poke it with your knife. The fat gives way easily now. You let the strip slip onto your tongue. It's not elegant, not even particularly flavourful at this moment, but the heat of it spreads across your mouth, down your throat and into your chest like a small sunrise. For a few seconds you feel almost warm. As you chew, you think of another small memory. One winter rider wrote that he heated snow in his tin cup not to drink, but to dip his cold biscuit into between bites. The idea appears only once in his diary, surrounded by unrelated anecdotes about lost mules and frostbitten toes. Perhaps he discovered the trick accidentally. Perhaps many riders did it quietly without noting it down. The lack of supporting accounts makes the technique uncertain, but you find the thought comforting, somehow a reminder of the small, clever choices that helped men endure long winter nights. You clear a patch of snow and lay your plate on the ground. A few other riders drift toward the fire, each holding a scrap of food they hope to warm. One man has a can of beans so frozen that the metal bulges slightly. Another carries half a biscuit in each hand, like brittle stones. You feel a kinship with them, a shared silent understanding that breakfast is not about taste or abundance. It is about fuel. One of them offers you a pinch of coffee grounds from his pocket. He shakes them into your tin cup. The grains hit the warm water and release a faint aroma that feels like a memory of comfort rather than the thing itself. You swirl the mixture and take a sip. It is bitter, weak, gritty, and perfect. The warmth gathers in your chest, easing the last traces of night's chill. You hand back the cup and the man nods in quiet thanks. No one talks much. Talking wastes breath and heat. Instead, you sit together in a small half circle around the coals, warming food that barely qualifies as food and treating it like treasure. The quiet companionship fills the space between you all like a second fire. You finish your portion of pork, wiping your knife on your pant leg. The biscuit is softened enough that you can break off another small piece without forcing it. You chew slowly, savouring whatever taste remains after freezing and thawing. Each bite feels like a confirmation that your body is still yours to command. As the sun finally crests the horizon, casting long shadows across the snow, you feel the warmth of food fuse with the warmth of dawn. The cold remains deep and unyielding, but you're no longer hollow. You stand with renewed strength, brush crumbs and frost from your gloves, and look toward the open prairie. With a little warmth in your belly, you feel ready or at least capable of facing the next stretch of the day. Out here, survival often begins with breakfast. You rise from your brief meal with a heaviness that comes from both fatigue and the cold gnawing at your bones. The morning light has settled into a soft yellow stretching long shadows across the uneven snow. Your breath fogs repeatedly as you survey the camp. The worst of the night is behind you, but now comes the task that winter always makes more delicate, coaxing the horses into motion. Quiet tricks for calming panicked mounts. In the cold can mean the difference between a controlled departure and chaos rippling across the herd. You step toward your horse, watching the steam drift from its nostrils in steady bursts. The animal paces lightly, anxious from the storm and from the long stillness that followed. Its hooves crush a thin crust of ice, with each movement producing soft cracking sounds. Horses often reacted sharply to cold mornings. One line preserved in a winter herder's personal notebook mentions that chilled air seemed to make even the gentlest mounts tighten their muscles like coiled wire. You see that tension in the lift of your horse's head, the stiffening of its ears. You avoid approaching directly from the front. Instead, you walk in a slow arc toward its left shoulder, keeping your posture loose, your steps deliberate. The horse flicks an ear, acknowledging your presence without yet relaxing. You extend your hand not to grab, but to let it catch your scent. The animal snorts once, and when its breathing steadies, you place your gloved palm gently along its neck. The warmth rising from its coat moves into your hand like a living pulse. As you stroke its mane, you remember something unusual you once read in a worn travel ledger. One old rider claimed he whispered nonsense sounds, not words, just soft syllables to calm skittish horses on freezing mornings. The note was short, offered without explanation, and stood alone among more practical entries. Whether those strange sounds truly helped, or whether the writer simply found comfort in the ritual, remains uncertain, since no other surviving document mentions anything similar. Still, you murmur a soft stream of quiet tones, now nothing meaningful, just a low sequence meant to keep your own nerves steady. Your horse exhales in a long, slow breath. A small sign of trust. You slide your fingers beneath its mane and check the skin for stiffness. Last night's cold has stiffened parts of the coat into thin ridges, and you time your touch carefully to avoid startling it. Winter recollections from old ranch families note that sudden pressure on frozen patches of hide could make a horse spook unexpectedly. You move slowly, checking each spot along its shoulder and flank. Nearby, another rider struggles with his mount, the animal shifting in anxious half circles. You hear the muffled sound of hooves kicking up snow behind you. The horse's panic begins to ripple toward the others, their ears turning, their bodies stiffening in response. You step between your horse and the source of commotion, placing your hand on its shoulder with firmer confidence. This kind of subtle guidance appears in numerous accounts recorded by seasoned drovers. A rider's steady touch could redirect a mount's attention away from chaos and back toward the familiar. You keep your palm against your horse's warm neck and begin to hum softly the same low, even tone used during the night. The horse's breathing slows again. You guide it a few steps forward and back, letting the motion melt the stiffness from its joints. The snow crunches beneath you both in rhythmic patterns that soothe your racing thoughts. As you tend to the animal, an odd idea surfaces from a sparse line found in a weather-beaten ranch. Note a few cowhands swore that brushing frost off a horse's flanks, using a strip of cloth rather than a gloved hand, kept the animal calmer. Theories in later commentary differ wildly, some suggesting the cloth offered gentler contact, others guessing it carried a familiar scent of camp rather than human cold. The truth is unclear. Still, you take a spare rag from your saddlebag and sweep it gently along the horse's flank. Frost comes away in delicate sheets. The animal relaxes further beneath your touch. When its posture softens, you reach for the saddle. The leather is stubborn, but your earlier work has kept it flexible enough. You lift it in one smooth motion, careful not to jostle the horse. The saddle settles onto its back with a muffled thud. You check the cinch, still stiff but manageable. The horse twitches once at the cold contact, but a soft murmur from you steadies it again. Another rider calls out for help. His mare has begun to toss her head violently. You walk over, knowing the cold makes every nervous motion more volatile. You approach from the mare's side, avoiding direct eye contact, and let her sense your presence through sound rather than touch. When she turns her head slightly, you gently press the cloth you used earlier against her shoulder and sweep downward. The mare stops tossing, just for a moment, but long enough for her rider to regain control. The rider gives you a weary nod. You return it with a quiet one of your own. In winter, gestures serve as communication more than words. You go back to your horse and check the reins. They've stiffened again, but with a few passes through your hands, they soften enough to feel familiar. You settle your palm against the horse's cheek. The animal leans into the contact, its breath warming your glove. You close your eyes briefly, letting the simple connection steady you. Across camp, someone whistles a signal to begin gathering the herd. Horses react immediately, ears lifting, bodies shifting with readiness. Before mounting, you give your horse one last sweep of the cloth, removing the final thin layer of frost. The movement feels ceremonial, a final reassurance for both of you before the day begins. One more sound emerges from your memory, a comment tucked inside the back pages of a winter supply manual. The writer suggested that horses moved more confidently after smelling a rider's hand just before mounting, as if the familiar scent confirmed safety. The idea lacks support from other accounts, and its credibility is uncertain, but you decide to test it anyway. You place your gloved hand gently beside the horse's muzzle. It breathes in, then exhales with a soft snort. You sense its focus return fully to you. You grip the saddle horn, place your boot in the stirrup, and swing yourself up in a fluid motion, made slightly awkward by the lingering cold. The horse shifts beneath you, then stands steady. The herd begins to move. Snow crunches beneath hooves. Breath steams in long trails. You settle into the saddle, scanning the horizon. The morning is still cruelly cold, but the horses have found their calm. Their trust coaxed carefully from the night's tension holds the herd together long enough for the day to begin. Out here, where the cold strips everything to its starkest form, the bond between rider and mount becomes more than skill. It becomes a shared endurance. And as you guide your horse forward, you feel that bond anchor you both against the vast winter ahead. You guide your horse a few paces forward, letting it settle into an easy rhythm, while you look across the vast white plain that stretches beyond camp. The cold has drawn the horizon into a thin, shimmering line. Sunlight scatters over the snow in quiet flashes, creating the illusion of warmth where there is none. Now comes one of the most exhausting parts of life on the winter range, putting yourself back into motion after a frozen night. Even a short ride in these conditions demands a careful preparation of your own body as much as your gear. You shift in the saddle, feeling your muscles protest. Your legs ache with the stiff heaviness that comes from huddling in blankets for too many hours. Riders from the era sometimes wrote that dawn rides after freezing nights felt like trying to steer a body carved from timber. You sense the truth of those old words now as you stretch your spine and roll your shoulders, each movement a negotiation with half-frozen joints. You ease your horse into a slow walk, testing your balance. The animal's warmth radiates upward through the saddle, warming your legs in uneven patches. You breathe deeply, letting the cold sting your lungs. The sting becomes a steady burn, then slowly fades as your breath adjusts. In one winter weather entry preserved in a trail journal, a rider noted that the best way to regain full breath after a frozen night was to let the first few inhales be deliberately shallow. He claimed it prevented coughing fits. Whether his reasoning had any medical grounding or simply came from personal trial is impossible to know now, but you follow the advice instinctively and find it oddly helpful. Your fingers adjust the rein, still stiff through your gloves. You curl and uncurl your hands to keep blood moving. The rising sun casts soft gold across your knuckles, brightening the frost that collects along your glove seams. You rub your hands together, generating the faintest warmth through friction. Slow improvement, but enough to keep sensation from fading again. As you ride toward the cattle, the snow crunches under your horse's hooves in predictable patterns. The herd stirs, forming loose waves of movement. You shift your weight, guiding your horse around the outer edge of the animals. The cold air sweeps across your face, sharp as little needles. You blink through it and adjust your scarf. A curious memory returns from a scattered fragment of oral recollection you once came across. It described riders chewing small bits of bark to encourage warm saliva, claiming it helped prevent their throats from drying out in harsh cold wind. Only one account ever referenced such a habit, and no one else seemed to echo it, leaving the motivation behind it foggy. Regardless of its truth, you find yourself swallowing deliberately, now aware of the dryness that creeps in with each breath. You loosen your posture and let your hips follow the horse's movement. Your joints begin to warm bit by bit. The stiffness drains from your shoulders first, then your back. Your legs resist longer, stubborn from the cold, but eventually yield to the rhythm of the ride. This slow thawing of the body was often described in old winter notes by working cowhands as the unofficial start of the day, when warmth returned not through blankets or fires, but through the motion of guiding livestock. You urge your horse into a slightly faster walk. The shift in pace sends a welcome flush of heat up your thighs. The animal's muscles flex beneath you, steady and confident. You grip the saddle horn briefly to adjust your balance. As your body warms from within, you feel your mind sharpen too. Cold fog seems to lift from your thoughts. A few cattle attempt to drift from the group heads lowered as they search for sparse patches of exposed grass. You steer your horse toward them, gently nudging them back into formation. While doing so, you notice one calf stepping with a limp. You dismount slowly, your boots sinking into the snow with dull cracks, and approach it. The calf's leg trembles when you touch it. Frost has gathered along its hoof. You clear the frost carefully, your fingers moving tenderly despite the gloves. The calf steadies its small body, trembling with the cold. You guide it back toward its mother. Moments like this often appeared in early ranch notations, revealing how winter forced riders to care for the cattle with more attention than in any other season. You mount again, using your horse's shoulder for balance. The saddle groans under your weight, and your own spine cracks faintly as you settle. You tap your heels gently, encouraging the horse forward. The movement jolts warmth into your lower back. You pause a moment and scan the horizon. The light now strengthens into a soft glow, promising a clearer day ahead, though still brutally cold. You pull your scarf higher and feel the fabric scratch gently across your chin. The breeze carries a faint chill, but compared to the storm before dawn, it feels almost forgiving. A rider nearby adjusts his seat and calls out that his legs feel like frozen fence posts. You laugh quietly into your scarf. Another rider flexes his hands and mutters about how long it takes for his fingers to behave like fingers again. This sentiment appears in multiple first-hand accounts from winter, drives the idea that men slowly return to themselves as the cold loosened its grip. You continue guiding your horse in slow loops, letting each movement coax warmth deeper through your limbs. As sensation returns, you feel the familiar steadiness settle into your muscles. This thawing, though uncomfortable, signals that your body is ready to face the day's demands. You lift your reins slightly and let your horse ease into a trot. This sudden bounce pushes heat through your entire frame. You grit your teeth against the shock of it, then breathe into the movement. After a few moments, you feel more fully awake, more fully present. The cold still lingers at the edges of your awareness, but it no longer owns you. You have warmed your muscles, steadied your breath, regained your balance. The prairie stretches before you, its challenges unmoved by your efforts, but you're now prepared to meet them. With legs thawed enough to trust and hands warm enough to grip the reins, you settle deeper into the saddle. The day's work awaits, and you feel at last ready to ride into it. You ease your horse into a slower rhythm and take in the landscape stretching before you. The morning light glints across the snow in scattered flecks, bright enough to make you squint, yet still cold enough to sting your cheeks. The prairie seems endless, a quiet sheet of white broken only by the soft hum of wind moving along its surface. Your breath forms a pale cloud as you settle deeper into the saddle. This part of the day belongs to one of the most demanding winter tasks, reading tracks buried under fresh frost. Decoding those faint imprints can guide you toward the herd's drifting edges, warn you of predators, or reveal subtle changes in the land after a storm. You steer your horse toward a slight depression in the snow where the ground dips. The surface looks undisturbed at first glance, but As you lean forward, you catch the faint indentation of hooves. The snow around them has crusted into thin, brittle ridges. Notes copied from a winter foreman's log show that tracks formed just after dawn often appear softened by cold light, their edges sharpened by frost. You can see that effect clearly now as the horseshoe shapes glimmer faintly under the sun. You drop lightly from the saddle boots, crunching softly. Kneeling, you brush a thin layer of snow aside and find deeper impressions beneath. The tracks lead west, curving in a slow arc. The pattern suggests a small group of cattle wandered sometime during the night. You stand and follow the first few steps, your shadow stretching long across the ground. While you study the trail, a faint recollection rises from a worn page you once read in an old ranch notebook. The caretaker had scribbled a curious comment about riders sniffing the air near fresh tracks to detect which animals passed recently. He claimed warmer breath left a sharper scent on cold mornings. The line stands alone in his notes, never repeated or explained elsewhere, leaving you uncertain whether he meant it literally or as a bit of dry humour. You try the motion anyway, leaning close and breathing in the cold air above the tracks. Only the crisp scent of frost meets you, but the act steadies your focus. You remount and guide your horse along the faint trail. The snow dips irregularly, betraying where cattle stepped more heavily. Farther on, the prints shift direction. You notice slight differences in spacing. The marks stretch farther apart, suggesting the animals picked up their pace. Several winter accounts copied from early drives indicate that cattle tended to move more quickly when searching for exposed patches of grass after storms. You angle your reins to the right, letting your horse follow the rhythm of the prints. As you move deeper along the trail, a series of strange patterns catches your eye. Thin scratches etched into the snow beside the hoof prints. They look like something dragged lightly across the surface. You dismount again, curiosity pulling you closer. Kneeling, you run your glove along the lines. They form irregular curves, inconsistent and sharp. A story emerges from a distant memory of an oral tale told by an elderly drover. He once described a steer with a habit of sweeping its muzzle across the ground when anxious, leaving peculiar curved marks beside its tracks. Whether this behaviour belonged to many animals or only to that single steer remains unclear, as no other source seems to mention anything quite like it. Yet the thought fits what you see now. The wind picks up slightly. Snow swirls in a faint spirals, almost erasing the marks before your eyes. You stand quickly. Tracks can vanish in minutes under this light breeze. Your horse snorts behind you, shifting as if eager to move before more evidence disappears. You step back into the saddle and continue westward. A minute later, another set of prints crosses the trail, smaller, tighter and sharper edged. You lean close and examine them as you ride. These belong to a coyote. Its paws press neatly into the snow, the claws leaving small crisp notches. Several drovers recorded that predators often moved along cattle trails after storms, not to hunt directly, but to inspect the easier path animals had already cleared. You glance ahead, scanning for more of the same. The paw prints veer northward, drifting toward a shallow gully. No immediate danger to the herd, but worth noting. You continue following the primary trail. The hoof prints grow deeper as the ground slopes slightly. Your horse picks its steps carefully. In the distance, you notice a patch of churned-up snow, brighter than the rest. You approach and dismount again. The snow has collapsed inward, forming a shallow depression. Kneeling at its edge, you trace the outline with your glove. It reveals where a cow likely slipped, left a short slide mark, and then regained its footing. Several trail recollections hint that cattle occasionally faltered on hidden ice patches after storms. The descriptions vary considerably, so it's difficult to know how common the issue was, but the subtle signs here match those scattered remnants of memory. You rise and brush snow from your knees. The wind stirs again, carrying a faint crackling sound across the plain. You shield your eyes and scan the horizon. The ridge of snow ahead shifts slightly in the breeze, sending glints of light bouncing back at you. You squint and make out more tracks curving toward the north. The line is uneven, suggesting cattle wandered before settling again. You follow the tracks to a shallow bowl in the landscape where snow piled up into drifts. The hoof prints vanish momentarily beneath the deeper snow, then reappear on the other side more faint. You ride across the bowl, slowly feeling the horse's hooves sink into the softness. The cold air sharpens around your face, but the sun has risen high enough to dull its earlier bite. You reach the top of a small rise. From here you can see the scattered edge of the herd, the cattle moving lazily in the direction of the morning sun. Relief settles across your shoulders as you spot them. You guide your horse forward, weaving between small ridges of drifted snow. As you approach the animals, you glance back at the faint trail winding behind you, like a ghostly map carved into the frost. Riders from earlier generations noted repeatedly that winter tracking demanded patience above all else. The cold altered prints quickly, sunlight reshaped edges. Even the faintest breeze could scatter clues. Yet this morning you found your way through it, following depressions, reading the rhythm of hooves, interpreting scratches left by anxious movement. As you approach the herd, your horse snorts loudly, sending a puff of warm breath into the air. The cattle turn their heads toward you, some exhaling long streams of steam into the light. You feel a small surge of satisfaction. The trail led you here through cold and shifting clues, and now you return to the center of the group with confidence renewed. You settle in beside the cattle, letting the quiet of the open prairie surround you. For a moment the world feels still again, as if the day itself paused to acknowledge your steady work. The tracks you followed may have nearly vanished behind you, but their guidance still lingers as warmth in your chest. You guide your horse back toward the heart of the herd, letting the morning light rest on your shoulders. The frost that clung so fiercely to the world earlier now glitters like crushed glass scattered across the snow. As you settle into position among the other riders, a familiar rhythm begins to pulse through the camp, the shift from surviving the night to managing the day. But in winter, even daytime holds dangers that slip quietly beneath the surface. The cold lingers stubbornly in your clothes and your bones, demanding steady movement to keep your strength alive. Staying warm at midday is its own strategic dance, and cowboys learned subtle methods to keep heat close even when the sun pretends to help. You tap your heels, gently urging your horse into an easy pace around the herd's edge. The movement warms your legs, sending a slow flush through your muscles. In a set of old ranch writings copied from a foreman's winter notes, it's recorded that most riders avoided sitting still during cold mornings. Instead, they chose a slow and constant loop around the cattle, allowing the steady motion to keep blood flowing. You follow that advice now, feeling the warmth gather along your thighs in small, grateful pulses. Your breath trails behind you in pale ribbons. You lift your scarf a little higher across your nose, letting your exhale warm the fabric. The heat gathers, forming a small pocket of comfort just beneath your eyes. As you adjust the scarf, a faint memory drifts into your thoughts. Borrowed from a comment passed down in one crew's oral stories, a few experienced men apparently held smooth stones inside their gloves during winter rides, letting the heat from earlier fires travel with them. The detail appears only in these spoken recollections, not in any written accounts, making its origin uncertain. You imagine the warmth of a stone resting against your palm and understand the appeal of such a method. Your horse quickens its pace slightly, eager to shake the stiffness from its legs. You let it move freely for a few seconds, flexing your fingers on the reins. The leather warms under your grip, the cold slowly freeing itself from the material. You open and close your hands, and sensation flows into your knuckles again. The sunlight hitting your gloves brings a faint heat, barely enough to notice, but comforting nonetheless. As you continue your circuit, your attention shifts to your coat. Frost from the night still clings in pale patches along the seams. You brush them off with a careful sweep, watching the frozen crystals scatter into the air like tiny shards of glass. The cold has stiffened the fabric, giving the coat a rigid shape that doesn't quite follow your movements. In a surviving page from a winter gear inventory, one rider noted that coats often behaved like boards in the mornings, refusing to bend until the sun warmed them slightly. You pull at the sleeves, loosening them gently until your shoulders finally feel less constrained. You turn your head and notice another rider clapping his arms against his sides. The sound echoes in the cold, sharp and hollow. He laughs under his breath and calls out that his ribs feel like frozen fence rails. His complaint drifts through the air, and a few others chuckle in agreement. Stories from early trail crews frequently mention this kind of rough humour. Men joked about the cold not because it was funny, but because humour made the discomfort feel less absolute. You encourage your horse up a small rise, allowing the elevated view to guide your inspection of the herd. The cattle bunch loosely steam lifting from their bodies. You scan their edges for stragglers, but all seems in order. As you sit there, the breeze shifts just enough to slip beneath your coat collar. A shiver crawls down your spine, uninvited but impossible to ignore. You pull your coat tighter and adjust your bandana to cover the exposed skin at your throat. A particular suggestion you once encountered in a winter riding manual resurfaces. Then the writer recommended tucking small pads of wool inside the collar, claiming it kept heat from escaping at the neck. The passage was brief and lacked any additional context, leaving modern readers unsure whether this tactic was widely practiced or simply one man's clever solution. You can feel the logic of it now, though your own coat must serve without extra padding. Your horse shifts its weight again, stepping through a patch of snow that crunches loudly beneath its hooves. You lean forward, letting the movement pull your body into a gentle stretch. This simple looseness warms your back more effectively than anything else you've tried this morning. Cowboys understood their own bodies just as well as they understood their gear. The old journals describe how riders chose their movements carefully to coax heat back into stiff muscles. You adjust your seat again, settling deeper into the saddle, letting the leather creak softly beneath you. The animal beneath you radiates warmth upward, especially along the inner parts of your legs. You thank the horse under your breath, a quiet gesture absorbed instantly by the cold air. The animal's warmth is steady, patient, unbothered by the winter winds. You continue riding the perimeter, letting your pace drift between slow and moderate. The sunlight reflects off the snow in blinding flares, forcing you to squint. You lower the brim of your hat to shield your eyes. The warmth of the fabric above your forehead feels like a small victory. As you pass another rider, he lifts a hand in greeting. His face is flushed from exertion, steam rising from his breath. You can tell he too is battling the midday cold, using movement to win back the heat. His body lost overnight. The two of you share a brief exchange of understanding, a nod to acknowledge that warmth must be chased, not waited for. You guide your horse around a cluster of low brush. The wind quiets here, blocked briefly by the small rise. The pause allows you to feel the heat gathering between your coat and shirt. You savour the moment before the breeze returns. Soon the rhythm of the ride becomes meditative, the crunch of hooves and the slow pulse of breath creating a calm that seeps into your thoughts. The cold still nips at your edges, but warmth grows steadily from your own motion. The day may remain bitter, but you are adapting, shaping your body to the demands of the season. By the time you complete your circuit, your muscles have loosened. Your breath has evened, and your fingers feel more pliable. The sun stands higher now, still pale but strong enough to paint the world in a soft, warming glow. You guide your horse toward the centre of the herd, letting the comfort of movement settle into your bones. Warmth, fragile and temporary, gathers inside you, ready to carry you through the long winter hours ahead. You slow your horse to a gentle stop as the sun pushes higher, its pale glow spreading across the snow like thinned honey. The herd breathes in quiet waves around you, their movement calm, their warmth drifting upward in soft bursts of steam. By now the worst of the cold has loosened its grip on your limbs, yet winter still lingers at the edges of everything you touch. Noon promises no real heat. It only promises clarity. And with that clarity comes the important ritual of midday adjustments, those final preparations that carry you safely through the rest of the day and back into another long night. You swing down from the saddle, your boots crunching into the thin crust of frost that has not yet melted. The horse nudges your shoulder, its breath warm enough to fog the air between you. You pat its neck and then crouch to check the saddle again. Winter has a way of stiffening leather even after hours of movement, and the tension in your straps tells you they need attention. You grip the cinch with your hands and ease the pressure gently, giving the horse room to breathe. Notes lifted from the brittle pages of winter supply ledgers show that riders often paused midday to inspect tack for hidden damage cracks, stiff seams or frozen buckles, since these faults tended to worsen after longer rides. You run your fingers along the stirrup leathers, testing their flexibility. They creak, but the sound carries less strain than it did at dawn. The metal buckles, however, still hold a biting chill. You wrap them briefly in your scarf, letting the fabric absorb some of the cold before exposing them to the air again. As you lean into the work, a faint recollection surfaces from a tattered ranch notebook. It described a rider who kept dried grass tucked beneath his saddle blanket to create a small barrier against cold air pressing up through the leather. The idea sits alone in the notebook, appearing nowhere else. You ponder it for a moment, unsure whether the practice offered meaningful warmth or simply reflected creative improvisation. Still, you brush away the thought and focus on your own gear, making steady adjustments. You check your horse's hooves next. Snow packs tightly into the grooves, forming icy clumps that cling stubbornly. You remove them carefully with the edge of your glove, avoiding the tender spots along the frog. Several recollections from winter ranch hands describe horses growing skittish or unsteady when these clumps formed, especially along slopes. You take your time, clearing each hoof until the animal stands with renewed confidence. Your own body feels the cold returning as you remain still. The wind glides across your back in a thin current. You stamp your feet lightly to regain circulation. Your toes tingle beneath the heavy wool socks. You roll your shoulders forward, then backward, loosening knots that the morning ride only partially eased. Nearby, a rider calls out as he dismounts, his voice thin from hours of cold air. He shakes frost from his hat brim and laughs weakly as it scatters into the wind. You watch him briefly, recognizing the familiar exhaustion. Winter riding etches the same look onto everyone's face, a mix of resilience and quiet surrender to the overwhelming vastness of the plains. You kneel beside your bedroll, still stored on the saddle's rear frame. Frost laces its edges once again. You brush it away with the back of your hand, being careful not to tear the stiffened canvas. The interior is still warm from the heated stones you used earlier, though the warmth is faint now. You refold the bedroll to trap what little heat remains. This helps just enough to keep the fabric pliable when the next cold front arrives. Your horse snorts, alerting you to a shift in the breeze. You rise and scan the horizon. The sky, clear moments ago, now gathers faint shreds of cloud. They move slowly, uncertainly, as though reluctant to commit to a new storm. You watch them drift and make note of their direction. Several accounts preserved from experienced trail captains point out that thin midday clouds often signal a colder night ahead, though the specific pattern varied from region to region. You sense the possibility of another freeze approaching. Your breath thickens in the air as you pack stray items back into your saddlebag: a tin cup, a rag stiff with frost, a few hardened crumbs of biscuit. You tuck each item, carefully avoiding unnecessary noise. Winter encourages quiet. Sound carries strangely across frozen ground, bouncing against ridges of snow and creating echoes that mislead the ear. Another rider approaches, rubbing his hands together. His fingertips look pale, almost chalky beneath the grime. Without a word, you pass him your spare pair of wool mitts worn thin from earlier seasons. He accepts them with a grateful nod. Riders on the frontier relied heavily on such unspoken exchanges. Those who kept extra gear often lent it without expectation, understanding the reciprocity shaped by long cold months. You check the cattle next. Their slow movements create soft rhythmic sounds, hooves pressing into snow breath, puffing into the air, tails flicking against stiff hides. You count them quietly, marking each familiar shape. The smaller calves cling to their mother's sides. The older steers stand with their heads lowered, chewing absent patches of frost-bitten grass. You run your gloved fingers along a cow's flank as you pass, feeling the warmth beneath the hide. The contact reassures you. One cow lifts its head, suddenly sniffing the wind with a sharp huff. You pause. The herd shifts, slightly unsettled. You hold your breath and listen. A faint rustle reaches your ears, the kind that could be distant wildlife shifting ice or nothing at all. You lean closer to your horse, resting your hand against its neck. The animal remains still. Whatever sound stirred the herd passes quickly. You let the moment settle and return to your midday routine. The sun creeps higher, but its warmth remains delicate, insufficient to thaw the deeper cold that lives beneath the surface of the day. Still, its presence brightens the world, painting the snow in soft gold. You mount your horse again, easing into the saddle with a long exhale. Your muscles feel steadier, now your balance firm. Around you, riders reposition themselves, forming a loose circle that guides the herd into slow movement. Noon stretches ahead, long hours of careful pacing, quiet direction, and shared endurance. As you guide your horse into motion, you feel a sense of grounded weariness, as though the morning's cold pressed lessons into your skin. You look across the winter prairie and accept its vast silence. Out here, warmth is something you build piece by piece, moment by moment through effort, instinct, and presence. Soon the midday work fades into the quiet rhythm of riding. Snow swirls beneath hooves, breath forms steady clouds. The sun moves in cautious arcs across the sky. And the day, harsh but manageable, carries you forward toward the long, slow descent into another winter night. The prairie softens as the sun leans into its downward arc, stretching the shadows long and thin across the snow. You feel the cold settling again, but gentler now, muted by the quiet that follows a day of steady effort. The horses breathe in slow, even pulses. The cattle murmur softly, their movements becoming smaller as the light fades. All around you, the land exhales into stillness. You find a moment to pause, to let your body rest without urgency. The air grows calmer, its edge no longer sharp, but cool and steady, drifting across your cheeks with the softness of evening. You close your eyes and breathe slowly, letting the rhythm of the herd settle into your bones. The fire you will build tonight will glow brighter because of the work done today, and the blankets will feel warmer for the miles behind you. The sky shifts into muted blues and faint lavender, the last warmth of daylight slipping gently into the horizon. You feel the day's tension ease from your shoulders, replaced by a quiet, spacious calm that settles over the camp like a second blanket. The sounds around you soften the crunch of snow, the distant creak of leather, the gentle sigh of your own breath. Night arrives slowly without hurry, and you welcome it. The stars blink into view, scattered and delicate, their faint glow resting lightly over the land. You let the vastness of the sky steady you. The heaviness of winter softens under the starlight, leaving room only for quiet, for breath, for the subtle warmth that lingers even in the coldest moments. You settle deeper into your blankets, letting your eyes rest, letting the night carry you. Soon the frontier fades into a soft, comforting blur. Sweet dreams?